Vikir van Baskerville, once a loyal hound of the infamous Baskerville family, knelt before the guillotine, betrayed and falsely accused of colluding with the demon clan. As the blade hovered above him, he vowed, if fate gave him another chance, he would never be a submissive hound again. To his shock, the guillotine's finality dissolved, and he awoke, not in the afterlife, but in the fragile body of an infant. Surrounded by the cries of newborns, Vikir realized he was in the Baskerville family nursery. His new life began under ominous circumstances. The cold-eyed patriarch Hugo Le Baskerville entered to inspect the infants. Dismissing the others as useless, Hugo's attention fixed on the silent Vikir, whose unyielding gaze betrayed no fear. Intrigued, Hugo ordered him sent to the Cradle of Swords, a deadly trial meant to forge Baskerville heirs. Vikir's hatred for Hugo burned hot. This was the man who had orchestrated his downfall in his past life. Memories of betrayal rushed back. He had been the Baskervilles' expendable pawn, loyal to the core, yet executed for knowing too much. But this time, Vikir would write a different story. Revenge could wait. Survival came first. The Cradle of Swords awaited, a brutal labyrinth of blades where children had to crawl to the Styx River, a mythical waterway said to fortify the body. The first to reach the river would reap its full benefits, while others were left with scraps. Vikir remembered how his siblings had sabotaged him in his past life, denying him the river's blessing. Not this time. Crawling through the razor-sharp maze, his infant body bleeding from countless cuts, Vikir pressed forward. Pain was an old friend, and he embraced it. Against all odds, he reached the river and plunged in. The Styx River's waters burned like molten fire, seeping into his wounds and bones. The agony was unbearable, yet Vikir endured. Compared to the torment of his past life, this was a whisper. Every second submerged strengthened his resolve and body. Outside, attendants panicked as they watched the infant endure far longer than any child before him. Hugo observed with his signature smirk, indifferent to their pleas for intervention. 7 minutes, reported John Barrymore, the family's butler. Hugo chuckled, his amusement tinged with grim expectation. He might not survive, Hugo called out, signaling it was time to surface. But Vikir ignored him. Each second in the river was a rare chance to grow stronger, and he refused to abandon it. The water began to flood his lungs, and his vision blurred. Even as his body screamed for air, his mind chanted a single mantra, endure. Just as darkness threatened to claim him, Hugo pulled Vikir from the Styx River. The patriarch's smug smile betrayed a mix of amusement and satisfaction. Greedy little thing, he mocked. You even try to drink the river. As Hugo examined him, something unusual caught his attention. Vikir already had teeth, an extraordinary trait for a newborn. Intrigued, Hugo turned to the head butler and asked the child's name. Upon hearing it, his smirk deepened. A very greedy son has been born, he mused, half amused, half impressed. Though weak and groggy, Vikir's mind remained razor-sharp. Silently, he vowed to grow stronger in secret and someday tear Hugo apart with his own hands. His hatred didn't stop with Hugo. It extended to the entire Baskerville family. They had tried to erase him once, but this time, he would make them disappear into history. As he lay in the nursery, the memories of his past life seared his thoughts. He was Hugo's illegitimate son, cursed with low status despite his extraordinary talents. By 20, he had proven himself a master of assassination, espionage, and conquest, earning renown despite the family's disdain. Yet to the Baskervilles, he had always been a tool, disposable and replaceable. At 30, when demonic gates unleashed hell upon the world, Vikir became a pillar of resistance, fighting for 5 grueling years. His efforts turned the tide, but instead of recognition, betrayal awaited him. Accused of treachery and silence for knowing too much, his life had ended on the guillotine. This time, however, Vikir vowed that no one, not Hugo, not the Baskervilles, would get the chance to betray him again. As he fully awoke, the power of the Styx River coursed through his veins, giving him a stronger starting point than in his previous life. Yet his thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the nursery door. A maid entered, startled to see him awake, muttering about Madam's unusual request to leave something on his bed. Curiosity piqued. Vikir waited until the maid left before inspecting the small box she had placed beside him. The lid creaked open, revealing 2 venomous mambas, their crimson eyes glinting in the dim light. Vikir's sharp mind pieced it together instantly. This gift was an assassination attempt, orchestrated by one of the few women in the Baskerville family addressed as Madam. The motive was obvious: eliminate competition. If Vikir died, the other infants in the nursery might also succumb to the Viper's fangs, removing all potential rivals. Hatred burned in his chest as the snakes lunged at him. With cold precision, Vikir caught the mid-strike, his tiny hands fueled by a lifetime's worth of rage and survival instinct. The venomous creatures writhed in his grip, but were no match for his iron will. By morning, the snakes lay lifeless beside him as Vakir peacefully dozed. The scene sent shockwaves through the Baskerville household. Chaos erupted as the nannies on duty faced brutal interrogations, their failure deemed an unforgivable crime. They were swiftly executed, but the Viper's origins remained a mystery to all, except Vakir. 8 years passed, and Vakir sat in a classroom, half listening as the teacher droned on about the hierarchy of swordsmanship. The students were captivated by the descriptions of the stages. Sword beginner, unable to imbue their blade with mana. Sword expert, capable of infusing a small amount of mana. Sword graduate, their blade shimmered with a liquid-like mana aura. Sword master, the pinnacle of mastery, able to form and shape solid mana freely. The class erupted in awe as the teacher mentioned that Sir Hugo, the family patriarch, was a sword master, the strongest in the Baskerville line. Vakir, however, paid no attention. His thoughts were consumed by his own goals, not Hugo's accolades. His coming-of-age ceremony was fast approaching, and each day brought him closer to the moment he would regain his full power. To him, the question wasn't if he could destroy Hugo, but when. The teacher glanced at Vakir, mistaking his quiet focus for disciplined dedication. Vakir's unmatched endurance in the Styx River and his remarkable physical development made him a standout. The teacher thought Hugo would be pleased. Vakir, however, cared little for Hugo's approval. He was busy calculating how many years he had left to exact his revenge. After class, trouble came in the form of 3 arrogant boys. Identical in every way, but their misplaced bravado, the triplets, Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough Le Baskerville cornered him. Known as Hugo's Trident, they sneered and jeered, calling him Garbage Van and mocking the stories about his legendary feats as a baby. Styx River? Strangling snakes? What a joke, Highborough taunted. The others laughed, feeding off each other's malice. Vakir's sharp memory identified them instantly. These were the same triplets who had betrayed him in his past life, stabbing him in the back when he was on the run from false accusations. At 9 years old, their cruelty was unchecked, but Vakir knew they would grow into dangerous obstacles. He debated whether to deal with them now or bide his time. Highborough, the self-proclaimed leader, pulled out a knife. They say your body's immune to blades, he smirked. Let's test that. Middleborough grabbed Vakir from behind, clamping a hand over his mouth. 3 minutes, he said with a sneer. If he can endure that, I'll eat my hand. The triplets began their experiment, slashing at Vakir with increasing frustration. 1 minute passed, then 3, then 10. No matter how hard they tried, the knife didn't leave a scratch. Annoyed and out of ideas, the triplets let Vakir go. Guess the legend's true, Middleborough muttered. As he released Vakir, he froze, noticing blood on his hand and the absence of a finger. Vakir spat the severed digit onto the ground, his expression calm, almost bored. What are you doing? Middleborough shrieked, his face pale. Vakir's dark smile deepened. You said you'd eat your own hand, he reminded him coldly. Panic gripped the remaining 2 triplets. We need a priest, they yelled, scrambling to find a way to reattach the finger. Vakir wasn't interested. His icy gaze silenced their panic, and he spoke with quiet authority. Leave. The enraged triplet lunged at Vakir with a knife, hurling insults and emphasizing their age advantage. Vakir remained calm, letting the blade strike him, but it failed to pierce his skin. Seizing the moment, he grabbed the boy's wrist and twisted it with merciless precision. The triplet screamed in pain as Vakir, his voice cold and steady, reminded them that in the Baskerville family, power and talent always trumped age. An evil glint flashed in Vakir's eyes as he taunted them. Shall we continue your little game? Let's see who lasts. He wrenched the boy's arm further, eliciting louder cries. The remaining 2 triplets, frozen in fear, soon snapped into action. One charged at Vakir in a blind fury, only to meet a devastating punch that sent him sprawling across the floor. The third followed suit, lunging in desperation, but Vakir countered effortlessly with a kick to the face, leaving him crumpled beside his brothers. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the groans of the defeated triplets. Vakir stood over them, his gaze icy and unforgiving. With chilling detachment, he told them that while their wounds could be treated, they would have to endure their pain for now. Then, with a mockingly generous tone, he offered them a way out. One of you can leave the room, Vakir said. Relief flickered across the triplets' battered faces, and they quickly asked which one of them would be spared. In response, Vakir picked up the knife and tossed it onto the ground between them. Decide for yourselves, he said, his voice dripping with cruel amusement. As he turned to leave, he added one last taunt. Don't take too long. At least one of you should live, right? The triplets stared at the knife, then at each other. The realization hit them like a thunderclap. Survival would come at a cost. Desperation overtook reason, and they began to fight, clawing and struggling to claim the blade. From outside the room, Vikir paused to listen, satisfaction curling his lips as the sounds of their infighting, grunts, shouts, and cries echoed through the hallway. The once united trident of Baskerville had been shattered, their bond irreparably fractured. Meanwhile, in the Patriarch's office, Hugo Le Baskerville received troubling news from his head butler, John Barrymore. "The Morgs clan is stirring trouble at the Ruby Mines, my lord," John reported. "They've started staking claims to the territory." Hugo leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "Let them. We'll deal with it when they come knocking," he replied coolly. John nodded and shifted topics. "The juvenile evaluations at the Baskerville Fortress have concluded the written exams. Master Vikir scored the highest." He hesitated briefly before adding, "The practical exams are in 5 days. The Guardian Knights have already begun clearing the training grounds." Hugo nodded, his expression unreadable, but John's slight hesitation didn't escape him. "Is there something else?" Hugo asked, his voice low. John hesitated again before finally speaking. "There's been an incident involving the young masters." Hugo's gaze darkened. "How many died?" "None, my lord," John quickly clarified. "But there were injuries. Master Highborough's teeth were completely shattered. Master Middleborough suffered a broken jaw, and Master Lowborough lost his left index finger." Hugo's face remained impassive as John continued. "The physical wounds have been treated, but the psychological impact seems severe. The boys are deeply shaken." Hugo's brow furrowed in mild surprise as he remarked, "The Trident of Baskerville is known for their unshakable bond. They wouldn't have turned on each other without good reason." John Barrymore, standing attentively, responded with precision. "The cause was another young master, Vikir. Not only did he inflict their injuries, but he also achieved the highest score on the written exam." Intrigued and faintly concerned, Hugo ordered, "Summon him." Vikir entered Hugo's office with a calm smile, exuding quiet confidence. Hugo greeted him with a tone of authority, commenting, "You've grown considerably since we last met." Hugo wasted no time addressing the incident with the triplets, noting the gravity of their injuries, not the physical ones, which had been treated, but the deeper wounds inflicted on their bond as brothers. Hugo's gaze was steady as he asked, "Do you think your actions were wrong?" Vikir met his gaze without hesitation, replying with his own question. "What did I do wrong?" Hugo's eyes narrowed slightly, yet he allowed Vikir to continue. The boy elaborated, asserting that in the Baskerville family, strength was paramount. If strength decides all, how can the stronger party ever be in the wrongs? Hugo paused, his expression unreadable, before revealing, "The triplets have already forgiven you." The revelation caught Vikir off guard. "They forgave me?" he echoed, incredulous. An old memory surfaced in Vikir's mind, a scene from his previous life. A young woman, the last survivor of a family annihilated by the Baskervilles, had come to Hugo as a nun. Despite her suffering, she forgave him, citing her faith. Hugo's response, cold and cutting, now rang clearly in Vikir's ears. Forgiveness is merely an excuse for the weak, who lack the strength to seek revenge. Drawing from that memory, Vikir repeated Hugo's own words back to him. Forgiveness is nothing more than a way for the powerless to cope with their inability to retaliate. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Hugo's stern expression softened into approval, his eyes faintly glowing with satisfaction. "You understand," he said simply. Turning to John Barrymore, Hugo issued an unexpected command. "Let him take whatever snacks he wants from the food storage, so long as he can carry them himself." Grateful but cautious, Vikir made a modest request, chocolates. As he turned to leave, Hugo's voice stopped him. "Perform well in the upcoming evaluation," the Patriarch said, his tone sharp yet almost fatherly, "particularly against the direct descendants of the Baskerville bloodline. Don't disappoint me, son." Vikir's lips curled into a faint smile, though his crimson eyes betrayed a simmering hatred. "Understood," he replied, and left with Barrymore. The head butler led Vikir to the storage room, proudly explaining the premium quality of their chocolates. "These are the finest in noble circles," Barrymore said. The Morgs clan spared no effort in procuring them. Before he could continue, Vikir interrupted firmly. "I don't want anything processed." Barrymore, momentarily taken aback, sought clarification. "Cacao beans," Vikir specified. "The ones with the richest aroma." Though puzzled, the butler complied, arranging for a batch of cacao beans to be brought to Vikir. As he placed one in his mouth, a nearby chef offered an explanation. "Those are bloody beans," the chef said, impressed by Vikir's choice. "They're legendary for their potency. Just one bean can produce up to 100 liters of chocolate. Their aroma and yield are unparalleled." The head butler, Barrymore, watched in bemusement as Vikir chewed on the bitter cacao bean without hesitation. Assuming Vikir had an unusual love for chocolate, Barrymore thought the boy's unorthodox request might be a clever ploy to secure more in the future. When the chef offered to process the beans into chocolate and deliver it to his room, Vakir declined, insisting on taking the raw beans with him. The peculiar request left the staff scratching their heads. What none of them realized was that Vakir had no intention of eating chocolate. These cacao beans were tools for a far more devious plan, one that would unfold during the practical exam in 5 days. Unbeknownst to everyone, the seeds of chaos had been sown, and a catastrophic event loomed, destined to become a defining moment in the Baskerville clan's brutal history. The Baskerville family, infamous as the Berserker family, forged their reputation through relentless trials and ruthless discipline. From their first steps, Baskerville children were shaped by grueling evaluations designed to strip away weakness. Among the earliest trials was a grueling mountain climb, with rest granted only in carefully rationed breaks. At night, they were forced to sleep beside the corpse of a slain monster, a grisly exercise meant to steel their nerves and prepare them for hostile environments. This unrelenting training produced warriors feared and respected across the land. However, it was at the age of 8 that the true test began, the deadly evaluation, a rite of passage that would cement their place in the Baskerville hierarchy. On the outskirts of Baskerville territory loomed the life-engulfing forest, a treacherous mountain infested with monsters. This foreboding peak was the site of the deadly evaluation. The young hounds, children selected for the trial, gathered at its base, their expressions a mix of determination and fear. Standing before them was Shadow Dog Pavlov Van Baskerville, an instructor renowned for his sharp instincts and formidable aura. He laid out the rules of the exam with cold precision. The task was deceptively simple: survive for 1 month on the mountain while hunting strong monsters. The scoring system, however, demanded both strategy and ruthlessness. Survive the month, 10 points. Avoid permanent injuries, 30 points. Defeat a monster, 70 points. Eliminate a contestant, 50 points. Fulfill all conditions, 90 points. But no one could achieve a perfect 100. Sir Hugo had decreed that perfection bred arrogance, and arrogance was the path to ruin. Additional points could be earned by stealing the badge issued to each participant. However, death carried an unforgiving penalty, 0 points. Pavlov issued a grim warning: do not stray beyond the designated area. While the marked zones were dangerous, they were partially subjugated with monitored monster populations. Beyond these areas lay the mountain's forbidden zones, where unknown horrors prowled. The shadow dogs, acting as examiners and covert supervisors, would observe the participants and minimize casualties where possible. Killing was not forbidden but carried penalties, and the instructors aimed to prevent unnecessary deaths. Yet in the Baskerville family, the line between survival and slaughter was perilously thin. As the young masters gathered at the base of the mountain, anticipation crackled in the air. Whispers rippled through the group, with many casting furtive glances at Vakir. His legendary endurance in the Styx River and the rumored incident with the triplets were hot topics of conversation. Vakir, as composed as ever, remained indifferent to their murmurs, his thoughts focused on the mountain before him. He had been to La Rouge et Le Noir before and was no stranger to its dangers. Unlike the others, who saw only a brutal test, Vakir saw an opportunity. Nearby, the triplets stood together, their usual arrogance dampened. Beads of sweat glistened on their foreheads as they cast uneasy looks at Vakir. Their nerves betrayed them. It was clear the memory of their encounter with him still lingered. Shadow Dog Pavlov, standing tall and imposing, offered a brief wish for success before the sharp toll of the bell echoed across the mountain. The evaluation had begun. The group exploded into motion, scattering in every direction. Some pursued carefully planned strategies, racing toward areas they believed offered an advantage. Others played opportunists, trailing their peers to claim their badges, or their lives, when the moment presented itself. The triplets, however, were already arguing. Each insisted on their own plan, their voices growing louder as frustration took hold. Their bickering slowed them down, their movements clumsy and disorganized. Watching from a hidden perch, Pavlov's expression darkened. Though he hoped to keep casualties minimal, the disarray among the participants hinted at an inevitable bloodbath. One shadow dog, assigned to monitor Vakir, followed him closely, while the other candidates scrambled for safe zones or sought out weaker competitors to target. Vakir took an entirely different route. He strode confidently toward the restricted zone, a place forbidden even to many of the instructors. The shadow dog's curiosity was piqued. Who was this boy? Rumored to be a prodigy, Vakir had already distinguished himself through his feats. His boldness in venturing into the restricted zone intrigued the seasoned observer, who followed silently, eager to see how Vakir would fare in the uncharted wilderness. Vakir stopped at a massive tree, scanning his surroundings with calm precision. The soft ground beneath the tree seemed like the perfect place to set up camp. To the Shadow Dog's surprise, Vakir began preparing to rest. While the other candidates battled monsters or plotted to steal badges, Vakir busied himself with mundane tasks, gathering wood, digging small holes, and practicing with a wooden stick. When night fell, he slept peacefully under the tree, completely unbothered by the chaos erupting elsewhere on the mountain. The Shadow Dog grew impatient. Was this boy truly a genius, or just a fraud avoiding the real competition? His so-called strategy seemed like nothing more than camping and cooking. Frustrated by the lack of action, the Shadow Dog eventually decided to abandon his watch, muttering to himself as he left to observe more interesting candidates. As soon as the Shadow Dog was gone, a sly smile crept across Vakir's face. He had been waiting for this moment. Without the observer breathing down his neck, he could finally focus on his real plan. Tossing a handful of bloodied beans into the fire, Vakir leaned back against the tree, reminiscing about the old days when camping like this was second nature. A quiet chuckle escaped him as he muttered to himself. Finally, that nosy dog is gone. The flames crackled, releasing the potent aroma of the beans into the air. Vakir's preparations were complete. The peaceful facade melted away, replaced by a glint of predatory intent in his crimson eyes. The real hunt starts now, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the flicker of the fire. A few days into the evaluation, Vakir ventured into the restricted zone, a treacherous area he knew all too well from his past life. His sharp eyes scanned the charred terrain, his senses alert. The acrid scent of burning hung in the air, a clear indicator he was getting close. Scorched roots and smoldering stool confirmed his suspicion. His target was near. Towering before him, wreathed in sulfuric heat, stood a hellhound, a 3-meter-tall monstrosity with flames spewing from its mouth and eyes. The beast radiated terror, its very presence capable of incinerating anything in its path. Known for its relentless brutality, the hellhound burned its victims until nothing but ash remained. With a risk rating of B+, it was a living disaster, a nightmare brought to life. For a brief moment, doubt flickered through Vakir's mind. In his past life, he had barely survived an encounter with one of these creatures at 18. Now, as an 8-year-old, facing it directly would be suicide. But Vakir hadn't come to fight the hellhound head-on. He had a plan. The hellhound lunged, flames flaring wildly as it snapped its massive jaws. Vakir sidestepped, narrowly avoiding its bite. He recalled the creature's first critical weakness. Hellhounds could only move in straight lines. Their immense size and speed made sudden changes in direction impossible. Seizing the opportunity, Vakir quickly poured water onto the ground, creating a shallow puddle. The hellhound skidded to a halt, hesitating as it calculated a detour. "Can't cross water, can you?" Vakir muttered with a smirk. Like most canine monsters, the hellhound was instinctively repelled by water, even in shallow amounts. This bought Vakir precious time to reposition himself. But the danger was far from over. The beast's bloodlust was unrelenting, and it lunged again, flames roaring. Vakir sprang into action, executing the final step of his plan. As the hellhound opened its massive jaws to roar, Vakir hurled a bloody bean directly into its throat. The beast staggered, its snarls turning to whimpers as its body trembled violently. It collapsed, immobilized and helpless. "Chocolate's toxic to canines," Vakir remarked, watching the hellhound writhe. The bloody bean, capable of producing 100 liters of chocolate from a single seed, acted as a concentrated poison, overwhelming the beast in moments. With the hellhound incapacitated, Vakir approached with deliberate calm. His crimson gaze locked on its weak point, a vulnerable spot near its kidney, where no ribs offered protection. He gripped his sword tightly, then plunged the blade into the hellhound's side with surgical precision. The beast's body convulsed before going still. A rush of energy, its karma, flowed into Vakir, fortifying his young body. His sword felt lighter, his movements sharper. Inch by inch, he could feel himself reclaiming the immense power he had once possessed before his regression, all while still in the body of an 8-year-old. Standing over the fallen hellhound, Vakir allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He imagined the stunned expression on Hugo's face when he returned to the clan with the head of a B+ rank monster. With a flick of his blade, Vakir decapitated the hellhound and hoisted its massive head. The weight felt insignificant in his hands, a testament to his growing strength. As he gazed out over the charred forest, Vakir's smirk deepened. Victory was already in his grasp. He knew that this kill had all but guaranteed him first place in the practical exam. Vakir's triumph was short-lived. A low, menacing growl shattered the silence, and he turned to see a group of hellhounds emerging from the shadows. Their flaming eyes locked onto him, filled with vengeful fury. It was clear they had come for their fallen comrade. Despite the odds, Vakir remained calm. He gripped his sword tightly, mentally calculating his resources. He He had enough bloody beans to exploit their weakness, and he knew their patterns and limitations. Victory wasn't impossible, but before the hellhounds could attack, something unexpected happened. The pack began to whimper, their flaming eyes darting nervously as they shrank back. This sudden display of fear immediately caught Vikir's attention. Hellhounds never back down, even when facing certain death. What could terrify them? Vikir murmured, his heart pounding as he turned to face the source of their fear. His eyes widened in shock. Towering above him was a Cerberus, the legendary three-headed guardian of the underworld. The beast was colossal, 7 meters tall and radiating an aura of unmatched menace. Its 3 heads snarled and snapped, each mouth spewing fiery embers. With a risk rating of A+, Cerberus was leagues beyond the hellhounds in strength and ferocity. Vikir's mind raced. What is a Cerberus doing here? The monstrous creature was supposed to reside on the 7th ridge of life engulfing forest, far beyond the exam's designated area. Then he noticed something critical. Cerberus was injured. The creature's massive body bore several deep wounds, and arrows jutted out from its flesh. Blood trickled down its dark fur, and its movements were slower than usual. It was clear someone or something had been hunting it, driving it to this lower ridge. Realizing the opportunity before him, Vikir quickly assessed his options. An injured Cerberus was still a massive threat, but it was far more vulnerable than usual. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. With steely resolve, Vikir charged forward, his body moving with precision honed from years of battle in his past life. His blade flashed in the dim light as he landed several strikes on the massive beast. Each blow was calculated, targeting weak points exposed by its injuries. The Cerberus roared in pain, its fiery breath scorching the ground as it lashed out in retaliation. Vikir dodged with agility, his movements sharper than ever thanks to the strength he had gained from the Styx River. An injured Cerberus. This is doable, Vikir thought, his determination burning as brightly as the flames around him. But his confidence was short-lived. In a moment of carelessness, the Cerberus struck with lightning speed. Its first swipe shattered Vikir's sword, the blade exploding into fragments that scattered across the forest floor. The second blow hit him with tremendous force, sending him flying through the air like a ragdoll. Vikir's flight ended abruptly as his body slammed into a tree trunk with a sickening crack. The impact left him crumpled on the ground, motionless and battered. Blood spilled from his mouth, pooling beneath him as silence descended. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, Vikir's eyes fluttered open. Pain shot through his body, sharp and overwhelming. Panic flared as he noticed the unnatural angle of his left arm. His first thought was that the Cerberus had torn it clean off, but to his relief, it was still attached, though badly mangled. He grimaced, forcing himself to sit up. The Styx River's blessing saved me, he realized, though the protection came with limits. He wouldn't survive another direct hit. The Cerberus advanced, its 3 heads snarling in unison, fire and fury emanating from its massive frame. Vikir's instincts screamed at him. Brute force was no longer an option. Survival demanded a different strategy. Sometimes the wisest move was to retreat and live to fight another day. Swallowing his pride, Vikir turned and ran. His mind raced as he scanned the terrain for an escape. The beast's roars thundered behind him, its footsteps shaking the ground with each stride. Then he saw its salvation. A weathered iron fence loomed just a few yards ahead, marking the edge of the restricted zone. If he could cross it, he'd be closer to the safe haven he had prepared before the battle. Summoning every ounce of strength, Vikir sprinted toward the fence. The Cerberus lunged, its massive jaws snapping inches from his back. With a final burst of speed, he threw himself through the gate, crashing onto the other side. Relief surged through him, but there was no time to waste. The beast's pursuit was relentless, and Vikir had to move fast. He scanned the forest, his eyes locking onto the trap he had set days earlier, a deep pit camouflaged beneath thick foliage. As the Cerberus charged, Vikir led it straight to the concealed pit. Timing his move perfectly, he dived out of the way just as the beast lunged forward. Unable to stop its momentum, the Cerberus plummeted into the pit, impaling itself on the wooden spears hidden below. Vikir's lips curled into a grim smile. His meticulous preparation had paid off. The spears, coated with the essence of bloody beans, acted as a lethal poison to canine monsters. The Cerberus howled in pain, its growls turning to gurgles as foam oozed from its mouths. Yet, Vikir knew better than to relax. The legendary beast wasn't defeated yet. Despite its injuries, the Cerberus began to climb out of the pit, its enormous claws scraping against the sides. Vikir wasted no time. He grabbed a wooden spear, its tip smeared with venom from a bloody mamba snake, and hurled it with precision. The spear pierced the creature's side, eliciting another anguished roar, but the beast pressed on. Step by agonizing step, the Cerberus dragged itself forward. Vikir counted silently, his pulse pounding. 1, 2, 3. The beast advanced, each step slower and more labored than the last. 4, 5, 6. As the seventh step landed, the mighty Cerberus faltered. Its knees buckled, and with a final, earth-shaking groan, it collapsed lifeless at Vikir's feet. Vikir exhaled deeply, his body trembling from exhaustion and relief. The venom of the bloody mamba, true to its legend, had ensured the creature couldn't take more than 7 steps after being struck. He had hidden the spear long ago, a precaution for the most dire of circumstances. Today, it had saved his life. The immense energy of the defeated Cerberus surged into Vikir, strengthening his body further. His muscles felt lighter, his reflexes sharper. Power coursed through him, and he marveled at how close he was to reclaiming the strength of his former life. He turned to the massive corpse of the Cerberus, a testament to his victory. Its 3 heads alone would be proof enough of his feat, but there was a problem. The poison spears and venomous effects would be obvious upon examination. Rumors could spread, undermining his achievement. Vikir considered his options. Transporting the entire corpse was impossible alone, and while the heads were portable, he needed a witness to corroborate the kill. His thoughts drifted to the guardian knight, who had seen him carving the wooden spears days earlier. Perhaps they could vouch for him. A new thought ignited in Vikir's mind. The Cerberus was no ordinary monster. It was a gatekeeper. That could only mean one thing. It had been guarding something, most likely a dungeon. Vikir's pulse quickened. Dungeons were lairs of powerful creatures, brimming with rare artifacts and untold riches. The chance to uncover hidden treasure was too tempting to ignore. Before venturing further, Vikir took a calculated precaution. Scooping up a handful of the Cerberus's foul-smelling feces, he smeared it on his body. The stench was revolting, but it served a purpose, masking his scent from smaller predators that might cross his path. Survival before dignity. Following the Cerberus's trail through the forest, Vikir's experienced eyes spotted the signs. A path of dried soil, rotting leaves, and disturbed roots. Recognition struck him like a lightning bolt. This dungeon, he muttered to himself. In his past life, this place would be discovered a decade from now. By then, it would have already been plundered, its treasures long gone. But now, it was untouched. The air around it practically hummed with mana, an unmistakable sign of its vitality. The dungeon's entrance loomed before him, shrouded in oppressive darkness. Vikir approached cautiously, his crimson eyes faintly glowing with anticipation. One wrong step could mean death. He stepped inside, the silence broken only by the soft echo of his footsteps. The further he descended, the more the dungeon revealed its wonders. Veins of ruby minerals streaked the walls, their faint glimmers lighting the way. Vikir deduced they were connected to the nearby Red All Mountain, famous for its precious gems. His excitement grew as he pressed deeper into the labyrinth. Then, a glimmer of light ahead caught his attention. Quickening his pace, he entered a massive, brightly lit chamber and stopped in awe. At the chamber center stood a colossal ruby mounted atop a stone pillar, its intense, otherworldly glow illuminating the room. This wasn't just any jewel. Vikir could tell at a glance that the gem was infused with mana, its brilliance far surpassing anything he had ever seen. For a moment, he simply marveled at the treasure before him. But his awe was short-lived. Nearby, a skeleton lay crumpled on the ground. As he approached, the signs of violence became apparent. Deep stab wounds marred the brittle bones, and dried blood stained the floor around it, a silent testament to the victim's gruesome fate. Vikir knelt beside the remains, his sharp mind piecing together clues. Lying next to the skeleton was a weathered letter, its edges worn with age. Curiosity piqued, he picked it up and began to read. The writer introduced himself as Cain, but notably avoided providing his full name. The handwriting struck a chord of recognition deep within Vikir. His crimson eyes narrowed. "This is Baskerville handwriting," he murmured, his suspicions growing. The letter detailed a harrowing tale. Cain and his brother, Abel, had stumbled upon this legendary chamber, a place spoken of in Baskerville lore for generations. Together, they had navigated countless trials and slain powerful monsters to reach this fabled location. But their journey ended here. The letter revealed they had been trapped by the dungeon's final trial, imprisoned in this chamber for 3 agonizing years. Vikir's thoughts churned as he absorbed the weight of Cain and Abel's grim tale. What treasure could possibly justify such suffering? His attention returned to the massive ruby at the chamber's center. Its mesmerizing glow seemed to call out to him, and Vikir knew instinctively it held the key to the dungeon's final challenge. Approaching cautiously, he read the riddle inscribed on the stone aloud. When entering, it's 1. But once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. The cryptic words hung heavily in the air, their meaning elusive. Vakir recalled Cain's letter, where the brothers had wrestled with this very puzzle. Cain and Abel, twins separated at birth, had believed the riddle required them to become one again. This interpretation led to tragedy. Cain, driven by desperation, had killed Abel in a futile attempt to solve the riddle. Yet even after his brother's death, the treasure remained inaccessible. Racked with guilt, Cain had abandoned the dungeon empty-handed, his letter warning future adventurers of its cruelty. He called it the Devil's Den, a place designed to prey on human greed, offering despair instead of salvation. Vakir reread the riddle, refusing to succumb to the same despair that had broken Cain. The answer wasn't about people, it couldn't be. His sharp gaze scanned the chamber, noting every detail. The ruby's light, the skeleton's silent testimony, and the phrasing of the riddle itself. 1, 2, 1. Suddenly it clicked. The answer wasn't about twins or sacrifice. It was about shadows. Vakir stepped toward the ruby, his thoughts crystallizing. In the dark passage leading to the chamber, he had cast no shadow. Upon entering the ruby's glow, he became two, himself and his shadow. And when the light disappeared, the shadow would vanish, leaving only one again. It was simple, too simple for Cain and Abel, blinded by their assumptions. Vakir gripped his weapon and struck the ruby with a precise blow. The gem shattered into fragments, its brilliant light extinguished in an instant. The chamber lit up with a final, blinding flash as the ruby crumbled. Then, as silence returned, the treasure the dungeon had guarded was revealed. Vakir's breath caught. At the center of the newly exposed chamber stood a sword embedded in a stone. Its sinister aura filled the air, heavy with malice and power. The blade exuded a dark, otherworldly energy that sent shivers down Vakir's spine. Approaching cautiously, he read the inscription etched into the stone. "Only those with Baskerville's blood may claim me." His eyes widened. This wasn't just any weapon. It was the fabled Beelzebub. The name stirred memories buried deep within him. As a child, he had seen illustrations of the gluttonous fly, Beelzebub, in an old picture book. The monstrous entity was said to devour all in its path, an insatiable glutton tied to ancient legends. The stories of Beelzebub were more than legends. They were warnings. Known as one of the seven calamities, Beelzebub was part of the devil's holy constellation, a force of destruction so immense that 7 great families, including the Baskervilles, had risen to combat them. Each family had faced a fragment of their power, sealing the remnants within their lands. The first patriarch of the Baskerville family had battled Beelzebub, sealing its essence within their territory. Many dismissed these tales as myths, but as Vakir stood before the ominous blade radiating Beelzebub's malevolence, he knew the truth. The sword's existence was undeniable proof that the legends were real. Vakir stared at the blade, its dark aura flickering faintly like the dying embers of a fire. This weapon was more than a tool of destruction. It was a symbol of his family's cursed legacy. Yet, it also represented unparalleled power. He thought of the blood-soaked history tied to its edge. Beelzebub's sword, once wielded by the demon clans, had left countless human lives in its wake. The weapon was both a prize and a threat, but one thing was clear. It could not fall into the wrong hands. "This sword is mine now," Vakir declared, reaching for the hilt. The moment his fingers closed around it, an intense surge of energy shot through his body, forcing a gasp from his lips. The blade reacted instantly, vanishing from sight only to reappear moments later, fused to his hand. Vakir held his breath as the sword materialized again, emerging directly from his palm as if it had always been part of him. Its faint, ominous aura pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He stared at the weapon in awe. The sword wasn't just a relic. It was a fragment of the devil's holy constellation, imbued with potential that made his blood race. A grin spread across his face as he marveled at the power it could unlock. With such a weapon, his path to vengeance grew clearer. After thoroughly exploring the dungeon and finding nothing else of value, Vakir decided to leave. But as he approached the exit, a sudden wave of nausea overtook him. His vision blurred, his legs buckled, and he fell to his knees, clutching his stomach. At first, he thought it was his own hunger, but the sensation was strange, foreign. Then he understood. It wasn't his hunger. It was the sword's. Beelzebub's insatiable appetite was now linked to him, its hunger coursing through his veins. Stumbling out of the dungeon, Vakir felt the blade tugging at him, pulling in a specific direction. Unable to resist, he followed its guidance. It led him back to the Hellhound's corpse, still steaming from its earlier battle. Confused but compelled, Vakir extended the blade toward the body. His eyes widened as the sword came alive, voraciously absorbing the Hellhound's blood. The once dark blade pulsed with crimson light as it fed, its hunger satiated at last. As the feeding ended, the sword let out a strange, satisfied sound, like a child after a hearty meal. Vikir's own hunger faded, replaced by a gnawing frustration. The blade was unpredictable, its needs a burden he hadn't anticipated. Yet, its power was undeniable. Examining the weapon, Vikir noted its intricate design, slots embedded within the blade, faintly glowing. He recalled the stories about Beelzebub's inherent ability, gluttonous flies. The sword could absorb not only the blood of its victims but their skills, adding them to its arsenal. This ability made Beelzebub a weapon of limitless potential, but also one of chaos. Many of its past wielders had overindulged its appetite, allowing it to absorb so much that even their most fearsome opponents had been rendered powerless. I won't make the same mistake, Vikir muttered. He resolved to limit the sword's consumption to 3 abilities at a time, no more. Any more would risk making the blade unmanageable, and himself its victim. The barren trees and dried soil of the mountain took on a new meaning as Vikir reflected on the blade's gluttony. He suspected Beelzebub had been the cause of this desolation, its insatiable hunger draining life from everything around it. Inspecting the first slot, Vikir noted the newly absorbed skill, Hemorrhage Hellhound B+. This ability caused wounds inflicted by the blade to bleed uncontrollably, even from the smallest cuts, a devastating tool for attrition-based battles. His gaze shifted to the massive corpse of the Cerberus, and an idea sparked. Extending Beelzebub toward the body, Vikir allowed the blade to begin feeding. The sword's dark aura flared, and the Cerberus's blood was drawn into it. Before the weapon could devour the entire corpse, Vikir stopped it with a sharp word, tapping the hilt lightly as if scolding a pet. Enough, he muttered. The blade responded with a shrill cry, like a reprimanded child. Beelzebub's 3 slots were now filled. 1. Incinerate Cerberus. A+, inflict severe, flaming injuries that are resistant to healing. 2. Hemorrhage Hellhound, B+, causes catastrophic blood loss from even minor wounds. 3. High-speed regeneration. F. A minor healing ability absorbed from a crushed sewer rat. Vikir smirked, noting the high-speed regeneration skill. While not as impressive as the others, it could still prove useful in emergencies. He glanced at the squashed rat beneath the Cerberus's corpse and felt a mix of amusement and practicality. Reflecting on Incinerate Cerberus, Vikir marveled at its raw, destructive power. Thermal injuries, he knew, inflicted far more agony than hemorrhage. With his preparations for the exam complete, Vikir chose to remain near the Cerberus's remains until the evaluation officially ended. When the young hounds returned to Baskerville Fortress, the elders began assessing their performances. Each participant was awarded a reward crafted from the remains of their hunted monsters, a sword, shield, or necklace symbolizing their success. But one hound stood out above the rest. In his office, Patriarch Hugo Van Baskerville leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised in mild surprise. Turning to his head butler, John Barrymore, he asked, "Who caught what?" Barrymore responded dutifully. Master Vikir Van Baskerville, the 8-year-old hound, hunted a Cerberus, an A+ rank monster that wandered into the restricted area during the exam. Hugo's surprise deepened. Even the family's guardian knights avoided facing such creatures. Yet, Vikir had managed to slay one. Barrymore continued, explaining that the Cerberus had been previously wounded by the barbarian tribe before Vikir encountered it. The boy had then used poison on a wooden spear to secure his victory. However, the exact nature of the poison remained unknown, as Vikir's hunting journal offered no explanation. Hugo smirked, intrigued. And why hasn't he clarified this? Barrymore hesitated before answering. The boy claimed he was tired and retired to his dormitory. The patriarch chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. The little brat is already so sly. He understands that information is power, and power has its value. Barrymore nodded, though his astonishment lingered. It's remarkable that such talent comes from a hound named Van, rather than Lon. Hugo dismissed Barrymore's implication with a smirk. I do not judge hounds by their lineage. I raise them for their talent and their spite. Even mutts can rise to greatness. His tone left no room for doubt. In the Baskerville clan, skill and ambition outweighed noble birth. Barrymore hesitated, his mind drifting briefly to Hugo's second son, who was undergoing isolation training. He wondered if Hugo's indifference masked concern, but chose not to voice his thoughts. Instead, he bowed slightly and apologized for his earlier comment. Hugo waved it off. Enough of that. Bring me something to lift my spirits. Shall I summon Master Vikir? Barrymore offered immediately. Hugo nodded, and the butler departed. When Vikir entered the patriarch's office, his composed, self-assured demeanor didn't escape Barrymore's notice. Hugo, ever direct, wasted no time questioning him about the Cerberus hunt. How did you manage it? Hugo asked. With calm precision, Vikir revealed his use of chocolate as a poison, exploiting its lethal effect on canine monsters. Hugo's eyes briefly widened in surprise, quickly piecing together the implications. The boy's earlier request for chocolate hadn't been a whim, It had been a carefully laid strategy. Barrymore, standing nearby, was equally astonished but kept his focus on the subtle tension between the two. The lack of formal greetings struck him as unusual. Was this how a father and son truly interacted? As the conversation continued, Hugo shifted gears. Why didn't you explain this to Barrymore earlier? Vakir's reply was curt but deliberate. The butler is not my master. Hugo raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Then who is your master? I belong to the clan, Vakir said without hesitation. The master of the clan is my master as well. Hugo smirked faintly, leaning back in his chair. Well said. He congratulated Vakir on his performance during the practical exam and declared that the Cerberus's corpse and all associated materials would belong solely to him. Hugo then announced an additional reward. As the highest scorer, Vakir was entitled to a special privilege, the opportunity to make a wish. Vakir's eyes gleamed at the prospect. Without hesitation, he requested access to the 10,000-book library, one of the largest and most prestigious repositories of knowledge in the Empire. Deep within the Baskerville clan's territory, the library housed forbidden techniques and secrets, accessible only to the Patriarch, the second-in-command, and their direct descendants. Hugo's eyebrows rose at the request. He reminded Vakir of the strict rules governing access, emphasizing that illegitimate children were barred from entry. Vakir, undeterred, replied coolly, if access is denied, I'll accept the decision. Inwardly, however, he was already devising plans to sneak in if necessary. To his astonishment, Hugo granted permission. You may enter, Hugo said, his tone calm but unreadable. Vakir was momentarily speechless, but quickly recovered. Hugo wasn't finished. Specifically, I want you to seek out the Baskerville 6 technique in the 6th restricted zone of the library. Barrymore's composure faltered. The 6th restricted zone was an area even the legitimate children of the family rarely ventured. No illegitimate child had ever been granted access this far, much less given a directive to retrieve such an advanced technique. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on Vakir. While he maintained his composure, his mind raced. Why is he giving me this opportunity? Even so, he reminded himself that the 6th technique, while formidable, was still far below Hugo's level of mastery. Before his regression, Hugo had achieved mastery over the Baskerville 7th technique, wielding the legendary power to bear 9 fangs. It was a feat that made him unparalleled within the clan, solidifying his place at its apex. But Vakir's ambitions extended far beyond the 6th or even the 7th technique. His sights were set on the ultimate prize, the textbook of swordsmanship, the foundational manual created by the first Baskerville Patriarch, who had subdued the 7 great disasters. It contained the teachings that had shaped the clan's unmatched legacy, and Vakir believed it held the key to his success. As Hugo offered a faint smile and wished him good luck, Vakir bowed, expressing his gratitude. Inside, however, he marveled at how Hugo had unknowingly handed him an opportunity of incalculable value. He doesn't realize what he's given me, Vakir thought. But it didn't matter. What mattered was what he would do with it. Arriving at the 10,000-book library for the first time, Vakir stood in awe. Towering shelves filled with ancient tomes stretched endlessly before him, each spine bearing a title that sparked his imagination. He read a few aloud, letting the evocative names linger in the quiet air. Severing incisors, grinding molars, piercing canines, snaggle tooth that embeds twice, wisdom teeth that lay down. These were the forbidden secrets of Baskerville swordsmanship he had long coveted but had been barred from learning in his past life. Yet he understood the logic behind the restrictions. The Baskerville clan had deliberately designed their techniques to cap the progress of their hounds at the 4th technique. It was a safeguard, a leash, ensuring no hound could turn their sharpened fangs against their master. Pressing onward, Vakir's steps were purposeful as he navigated the labyrinth of knowledge. Eventually, he arrived at a section guarded by heavy chains. Behind the iron bindings rested a massive tome, its lock glinting in the dim light. Vakir's crimson eyes narrowed. This is it, the Baskerville 6 technique. For a moment, he couldn't believe it. Hugo had truly granted him access to something he could only dream of in his past life. Unlocking the chains, Vakir smirked. He knew why Hugo had allowed him here, because the Patriarch likely believed number 8-year-old could possibly memorize the book's contents in a single day. But Hugo underestimated him. Before his regression, Vakir had already studied the theories behind the 1st through 4th techniques exhaustively. His obsession had even bred frustration. He had grown sick of those early stages, dissecting them endlessly in his quest to deduce the 5th technique. It was then he realized his past mistake. After drawing the 4th tooth, he hadn't stopped the flow of mana. That single oversight had kept the 5th technique out of his reach. The Baskerville swordsmanship followed a unique progression system. Each technique corresponded to a specific number of fangs. The 1st technique bore 1 fang, the 2nd 2, and so on. With each stage, a distinct red sword energy manifested. a visual representation of the user's mastery. The sixth technique, with its immense power, was a treasure Hugo likely thought Vikir could glimpse but never truly grasp. But Vikir's focus wasn't on the sixth technique itself. He wasn't here for what Hugo expected. His goal was far more audacious: to find a way to transcend his current limitations entirely. Leaving the swordsmanship section, Vikir caught the guards off guard. They stared at him in disbelief. "You're already finished reading?" one asked, incredulous. Another guard, clearly impressed, offered to retrieve more advanced texts from the deeper sections of the library. "You should check out the techniques stored in the restricted zones. That's where the real treasures are." But Vikir declined with a polite nod. "I've completed my task." The guards exchanged amazed glances as Vikir walked away. "Does he even realize how valuable those techniques are?" one whispered. "If it were me, I'd spend every second memorizing them," the other added. Vikir smirked to himself, letting them think what they wished. He knew exactly what he was doing. Amid the dusty shelves of miscellaneous books, Vikir searched for the real treasure he sought. His crimson eyes scanned row after row until they landed on an unassuming, tattered book tucked away in a neglected corner. Its title read, "Lurking Embedded Teeth." The book's worn cover and damaged pages made it appear worthless, a relic forgotten by time. Vikir held it in his hands, his expression calm, but inside his heart raced. He vividly recalled the time before his regression when he had served in the Hound Squad. During a mission, his team had stumbled upon a torn page from a Baskerville swordsmanship textbook. The page bore the unmistakable handwriting of a Baskerville ancestor and contained cryptic hints about a forgotten technique. When the page was brought to Hugo, it sent the patriarch into an obsessive frenzy. Determined to find the original text, Hugo scoured the library for years before finally locating it. Within the lurking embedded teeth, the book, hidden among useless texts, contained the writings of a Baskerville ancestor and revealed the existence of the legendary 10th Fong technique. Vikir remembered the carnage that followed. Hugo, captivated by the promise of the 10th Fong, declared war on anyone holding the missing pages. He dispatched Baskerville hounds to the 7 great families to recover the remaining 6 pages. The mission came at an unimaginable cost. Hounds died by the dozens, their bodies piling high, drenched in blood. When the pages were finally recovered, Hugo's only acknowledgement was a cold, dismissive phrase: "Good job." Vikir's hands clenched as the memory burned in his mind. The senseless waste of life enraged him. He vowed that history would not repeat itself. He would surpass Hugo, not by mimicking his methods, but by learning from his mistakes. Flipping through lurking embedded teeth, Vikir noted its disjointed techniques and incomplete passages. Without the missing pages, the book was little more than a fragmented puzzle. But Vikir had an advantage no one else did. Before his regression, he had memorized every detail of those lost pages. The reason he couldn't progress beyond the 4th technique in his previous life wasn't his lack of skill or mana. It was the absence of this original text. The missing pages were the key to understanding the techniques in their entirety. As Vikir closed lurking embedded teeth, he muttered to himself, "To most, this book would seem like meaningless, disjointed nonsense. But with the missing pages, the misleading information transforms into an absolute masterpiece." He marveled at the text's brilliance, understanding that its true genius emerged only when the blanks were filled. Before his regression, Vikir had reached the pinnacle of graduate aura and mastered the highest level of the 4th Fong technique. Now, armed with this knowledge, he was confident he could surpass it. This time, however, he vowed to avoid the mistakes of his past. Before he turned 15, he would reclaim all the power he had lost, and more. Engrossed in the book, Vikir lost track of time. By the time he finished, dawn had broken. The realization of how much he had achieved filled him with pride. He had memorized every word, every nuance of the text. Glancing around the library, he noticed the absence of the Guardian Knights. The silence emboldened him. Though his young body wasn't yet capable of drawing all 10 fangs, he was certain the elusive 5th Fong technique, which had eluded him in his past life, was finally within reach. Approaching a nearby statue, Vikir steeled himself, his mind focused and his heart resolute. He began executing the Baskerville sword techniques, unleashing every ounce of power he could summon. First Fong technique, a sharp, decisive strike, its precision cutting cleanly through the air. Second Fong technique, building momentum. Each movement grew more deliberate and deadly. Third Fong technique, forceful and unrelenting. His strikes hammered the statue's surface. Fourth Fong technique, a whirlwind of honed precision, each blow infused with years of dedication. As his sword collided with the statue, Vikir's memories surged. He recalled the brutal struggle to reach graduate aura in his past life, only to have his illegitimate status bar him from progressing further. The direct bloodline of the Baskervilles had ensured he never advanced beyond the 4th technique, crushing his potential with their hostility. But this time was different. With each strike, Vikir channeled his anger, frustration, and defiance into his blade. In his mind, the statue became a vivid image of Hugo's face, taunting him. With a ferocious swing, he unleashed his full force, slicing through the statue in a series of precise, calculated blows. As the dust settled, Vikir stepped back, his breath ragged and his body trembling. For a moment, he stood still, hands gripping his weapon tightly, anticipation coursing through him. Then it came, a hot surge of energy flowing from his heart to his neck. He knew instantly. A triumphant smile spread across his face. He had done it, overwhelmed with emotion. Vikir nearly felt tears welling in his eyes. His success was monumental, but it was the tangible proof that left him awestruck. His canine teeth had begun to grow. In the Baskerville clan, this development symbolized the hound's readiness to draw their fangs against their master. Such a transformation had never occurred at such a young age in the clan's history. His body trembled with excitement as his mana surged within him, evolving into something far greater. The solid state of his energy had transformed into a liquid form, denser and more versatile. This was graduate aura at its true peak, a level of mastery that had taken him 30 arduous years in his previous life. Now, at just 8 years old, he had reached the same milestone. Vikir gazed at the flowing aura surrounding him, its liquid form a testament to his newfound status. To reach graduate aura was to ascend leagues above sword experts, and the realization filled him with both awe and quiet confidence. Yet this was only the beginning. His gaze shifted back to lurking embedded teeth, the book that had unlocked this monumental progress. The text's seamless transitions between offense and defense represented a swordsmanship technique of limitless potential, one perfectly suited to someone with Vikir's boundless ambition. Carefully, he placed the book near the window and allowed himself a moment to reflect. Since his regression, his growth in strength and skill had been exponential. With his current abilities, Vikir was confident he could hold his own against a mid-class graduate aura swordsman and emerge victorious. Still, he knew better than to reveal the full extent of his power. Not yet. For now, he needed to keep Hugo's eyes on him, buying time to secure everything he needed for the future. A sly grin spread across Vikir's face as he pulled out a magnifying lens. Positioning it over the book, he allowed the sun's rays to converge, igniting the pages in a small, controlled fire. As the flames consumed lurking embedded teeth, he remarked to himself that destroying the book would make it nearly impossible for Hugo and the hounds to piece together the 10th Fang technique. For him, however, it was no loss. He had memorized every critical detail. The acrid smell of burning paper quickly drew the attention of the library guards, who burst into the room. Startled to find Vikir there, they demanded an explanation. Vikir's expression shifted instantly to one of sheepish contrition. Bowing his head, he apologized profusely, claiming the fire had started when he had carelessly left the magnifying glass too close to the book. He even offered to report the incident to the butlers himself. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, fearful of punishment for neglecting their duties. One finally suggested that the blame lay with them for failing to monitor the library properly. "We're just lucky it happened in this section," one guard muttered, glancing at the ashes of what they deemed useless books. Seizing the moment, Vikir subtly steered the conversation. He mentioned their preoccupation with the Morg's clan and the disturbances at the Ruby Mines, suggesting this might explain their absence. The guards nodded in agreement, grateful for the excuse and eager to bury the matter. They promised to keep the incident a secret if Vikir did the same. As he left the library, Vikir apologized again, thanking the guards for their understanding. Once he was out of sight, a mischievous grin spread across his face. The guards' voices echoed behind him, praising him as thoughtful and considerate, someone who deserved respect. Vikir relished their naivety, knowing he had orchestrated the situation perfectly. Later, in Hugo's office, the patriarch leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Vikir. "So," Hugo began, "did you learn anything enlightening from the libraries?" Vikir replied cryptically, "Something warm, sharp, soft, and viscous." Hugo and Barrymore exchanged startled glances. The implications of Vikir's words hit them simultaneously. He might have achieved aura. Aura was the hallmark of a swordsman's true awakening, signifying their official entry into the world of the blade. Even among the most talented Baskerville hounds, reaching this milestone before the age of 15 was unheard of. Hugo, visibly skeptical, reminded himself that Vikir was only 8 years old. Shaking his head, he demanded, "Prove it. Show me what you've learned." Vikir nodded without hesitation, his crimson eyes glinting with quiet determination. In the heart of a massive Colosseum-like structure, Vikir stood alone at the center, his sword steady in his grip. Surrounding him, rows of young hounds looked on, their faces filled with confusion and curiosity. Beside Hugo, the head butler leaned in, his voice low. How do you plan to test the boy's skills? Hugo's smirk was both calculated and unsettling. By releasing a monster, the butler's eyes widened in disbelief. A monster? For an 8-year-old? Hugo confirmed with a nod, his smirk deepening. Hungry and feisty too, the gates before Vakir creaked open, and a chained orc was led into the arena by a guard. The massive, green-skinned creature snarled, its bulging muscles rippling with barely contained rage. Razor-sharp tusks jutted from its mouth, and its beady eyes darted around the Colosseum, assessing its surroundings with animalistic intelligence. A collective gasp rippled through the audience of young hounds. "That's overkill," one whispered. "Do they really need a monster like that to test him?" murmured another. Some muttered their concerns aloud. If things spiraled out of control, would the Guardian Knights have to intervene? But while the crowd buzzed with doubt, Vakir stood calm and composed. His sharp eyes fixed on the orc, he showed no sign of fear. His body was still, his blade poised, as Hugo gave the signal. The orc's chains fell away with a deafening clatter. With a feral roar, the beast charged, its massive bulk hurtling forward with terrifying speed. Vakir remained motionless, timing his move with surgical precision. As the orc lunged, he swung his sword in a blinding arc. The strike was fluid and flawless, severing the creature's arm in a single motion. The orc stumbled back, roaring in pain and confusion. Before it could recover, Vakir closed the distance with terrifying speed. Another precise strike followed, this time severing the orc's leg. The monster collapsed, growling in agony, its body writhing helplessly on the arena floor. The Colosseum was frozen in stunned silence. How? How did he do that? One young hound muttered. Did he even use mana? Another asked, incredulous. From his vantage point, Vakir noted the orc's confusion. Its bleeding wounds failed to regenerate, a hallmark of its species. Vakir smirked. He knew why. It wasn't just the severed limbs. Hemorrhage Hellhound, the ability imbued in his blade, was preventing the orc's famed regeneration from activating. A C-class monster like the orc was powerless against the lingering effects of a B-class Hellhound's curse. From the sidelines, Hugo watched intently, his face unreadable. But Vakir recognized the look. His father wasn't just evaluating the fight. He was deciphering what Vakir had learned in the library. Vakir decided it was time to give him an answer. Hugo's eyes began to glow faintly, a sign of heightened interest. Beside him, the head butler gasped, his voice trembling. That's an aura blade. In the arena, Vakir's sword began to radiate a brilliant red light. The energy was sharp and visceral, a manifestation of his mastery over aura. The orc, still struggling, roared weakly. But it was too late. Vakir charged forward, his blade slicing cleanly through the air. With a single, devastating strike, he decapitated the orc. The monster's massive head tumbled to the ground, its body crumpling lifelessly as the red glow of Vakir's blade faded into the silence of the Colosseum. The Colosseum erupted in astonishment. The young hounds could barely process what they had just witnessed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, growing louder as disbelief turned to admiration. Beside Hugo, the head butler turned, his voice trembling with excitement. It's the aura of a low-class sword expert. We've just witnessed the birth of a genius. There will never be another like him across all the families in the Empire. But despite the head butler's praise, Hugo's sharp gaze remained fixed on the pool of blood spreading beneath the orc's lifeless body. The creature's famed regeneration had been utterly nullified. He only won because the orc was weak, Hugo said flatly, though his tone carried an undercurrent of intrigue. Before Hugo could say more, Vakir's calm voice cut through the murmurs. Is there anything stronger than this orc? The Colosseum fell silent. An 8-year-old, asking for a stronger opponent after defeating an orc? Even the doubters in the audience were struck speechless. Vakir's reasons were clear. He wanted to demonstrate his progress, not just to Hugo but to the entire clan. A performance like this might earn him recognition. Perhaps they'd send him to a prestigious academy, or even dispatch him to a remote area, away from Hugo's direct control. Hugo leaned back in his seat, his curiosity piqued. A faint chuckle escaped him. It seems the orcs I brought from afar are not enough to satisfy my son's hunger. Turning to the head butler, he asked, do we have anything stronger? Something suitable from the creatures captured during the barbarian raid. The head butler hesitated, clearly uneasy. There is one left, my lord. Hugo's smirk widened. Bring it in. The massive gate creaked open again, its echoes amplifying the tension in the Colosseum. All eyes were glued to the entrance as the ground began to tremble with heavy footsteps. A collective gasp spread through the audience as a troll emerged, bound in heavy chains. Vakir stood calmly in the arena, his crimson eyes fixed on the towering creature before him. The troll, with its twice-human size, rippling muscles, and ferocious presence, was a creature designed to instill terror. Vakir turned toward Hugo, seeking silent approval. The patriarch gave a slight nod. The troll's chains clattered to the ground, and the beast roared, the sound reverberating through the Colosseum. It lunged forward, its massive fists swinging down in a punch that could crush a boulder. But Vikir was faster. With almost inhuman agility, he sidestepped the attack, the troll's fist smashing into the ground with a thunderous impact. Dust and debris flew into the air as the crowd gasped at the sheer force of the blow. Moving with calculated precision, Vikir slipped behind the troll, exploiting its momentary confusion. From the audience, a young hound shouted, "That's the perfect moment to attack. Why didn't he take it?" Hugo's calm, instructive voice cut through the murmurs. Trolls have extraordinary regenerative abilities. Only fatal attacks are worth it. Anything less is a waste of effort. A proper plan is essential to hunt a troll. The troll charged again, its massive frame lumbering forward with raw power but sluggish movements. Vikir moved with grace, effortlessly evading every swing, swipe, and stomp. Each step was calculated, each dodge precise. The audience watched in awe as the 8-year-old displayed remarkable poise. Yet their curiosity grew with every second. "Why isn't he fighting back?" someone muttered. "He's probably trying to tire it out," another speculated. "No," whispered a third. "He's waiting for the perfect moment to strike." Minutes of evasion stretched on, and even Vikir began to feel the tedium of the exchange. Enough, he thought. Time to act. Fully aware that he could end the fight swiftly with his full strength, Vikir deliberately chose a more calculated approach. His goal wasn't just victory, it was to make his progress seem plausible, not overwhelming. As the troll launched another heavy attack, Vikir seized the moment. With a single, precise swing, he sliced deep into the troll's arm, nearly severing it from its shoulder. Gasps rippled through the Colosseum as the audience believed the fight was over. But their astonishment turned to unease as they watched the troll's wound heal before their eyes. The severed tissue reconnected rapidly, and within moments, the arm was as good as new. Vikir frowned slightly. He had expected the troll's regeneration to kick in, but seeing it firsthand confirmed the challenge he faced. The hemorrhage skill of Beelzebub could nullify this, he thought, but he couldn't rely on such an obvious technique. It would reveal too much. From the sidelines, Hugo's sharp voice rang out. "Enough, Vikir. Stop before this gets out of hand." But Vikir's response was calm, resolute. "I'm almost done," he replied. "If I can't finish it with the next attack, I'll give up." The troll roared, its beady eyes blazing with rage as it prepared another charge. Vikir's mind raced, his plan falling perfectly into place. He knew exactly how much power he was willing to reveal. This will look like a breakthrough, he thought, smirking inwardly. A moment of growth under pressure. The move would impress Hugo and the audience while concealing the true extent of his strength. The crimson glow of Vikir's sword flared, its fiery aura blazing brighter than before. Gasps echoed through the Colosseum as the young hound's presence seemed to grow, commanding attention. The troll lunged with a guttural roar, its massive fist hurtling toward Vikir. Vikir met the attack head-on, his blade flashing in a clean, decisive arc. The audience held their breath as his strike cut through the troll's neck, severing its head in one fluid motion. The troll's body collapsed with a deafening thud, its massive head rolling across the arena floor. Silence engulfed the Colosseum. Every pair of eyes widened in shock, frozen in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Even the normally stoic head butler gasped audibly, his composure breaking. "The second technique," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "He's achieved the second technique of the Baskerville clan at 8 years old." His gaze turned to Hugo. "That's unheard of. Most don't reach this level until they're at least 18. In the center of the arena, Vikir stood with an innocent smile, his sword lowered, as if blissfully unaware of the magnitude of his accomplishment. "I did it," he declared cheerfully, his tone almost childlike. The silence that followed was deafening. Hugo remained seated, his expression unreadable. Yet inside, he was reeling. What he had just witnessed defied everything he knew about swordsmanship and training. An 8-year-old performing the second technique? The implications were staggering. A week later, Vikir sat in the Baskerville dining hall, staring down at a bowl of unappetizing meat porridge. Around him, the air was heavy with tension. None of the other young hounds dared approach him. Their gazes flickered toward him briefly, before they quickly looked away. Vikir wasn't surprised. In the Baskerville family, power was everything. His recent display had placed him far beyond the reach of his peers, and they all knew it. As he ate, Vikir reflected on his progress with satisfaction. Even Hugo seemed unsettled by his performance. So far, he had revealed only what he wanted them to see: his mastery of the second technique and his rank as a medium-ranked sword expert. Yet the truth remained hidden. He was, in fact, a low-ranked sword graduate capable of weakly performing the fifth Fong technique. Vikir's thoughts turned to the ability he had gained from the troll. Super speed regeneration, C+. now occupying Beelzebub's third slot. The skill bolstered his strength to the level of an average graduate or a swordsman. Yet he noticed an unexpected side effect. His appetite had increased dramatically since acquiring the ability. Shoveling another spoonful of porridge into his mouth, he paused as he sensed a sudden presence behind him. The triplets had appeared, surprised and wary. Vikir turned to face them cautiously. He had no desire to deal with them again, so he returned his focus to his food, hoping they would leave. But instead of provoking him, the triplets quickly blurted out their reason for approaching. "You were so cool during your fights with the Cerberus and the troll." The statement hit Vikir like a thunderbolt. He was so shocked that he spat out his porridge. The triplets, alarmed, asked if he was okay, but Vikir remained suspicious. Could this be a two-faced technique? Or maybe a deceitful policy? He wondered. For a brief moment, he even considered beating them up preemptively, just in case. But after a moment's thought, he decided to observe them further. Before Vikir could act, Barrymore appeared behind him, his presence commanding the room. "Master Vikir," the head butler said, his tone polite but firm. Vikir turned, startled. It wasn't often that the butler sought him out in the dining hall. "The Patriarch has summoned you to his office immediately," Barrymore informed him. Intrigued, Vikir quickly finished his meal and stood. The triplets shuffled aside, their sudden admiration for him still puzzling. With a nod to Barrymore, Vikir made his way to Hugo's chambers, his mind racing with curiosity about what awaited him. In the Baskerville Patriarch's office, Hugo sat in his chair, exuding his usual air of authority. Across from him stood Adolphe Morgs, the Morgs clan's proxy patriarch. The Morgs clan, a prestigious mage family, had a long, intense history with the Baskervilles, an iron-blooded sword clan. While their philosophies clashed, the Emperor's decree bound them to conduct annual joint training sessions for children between the ages of 8 and 15. "It's been a while," Hugo said curtly. Adolphe nodded politely. "Indeed. I trust this year's event will proceed smoothly." Hugo's tone was casual, almost dismissive. "The joint training has always been handled without issue." Adolphe raised an eyebrow. "Without issue? Last year, 2 children, one from each family, were seriously injured." Hugo waved off the remark with a faint smirk. "A scratch. Nothing more. It seems the Morgs children are dramatic." Adolphe's lips twitched in irritation. "The Morgs children are noble and dignified, unlike some." His words carried a subtle but unmistakable sting. Once, the Baskervilles and Morgs had enjoyed a strong alliance. The past emperor had even declared that magic and swords complemented each other, fostering cooperation between the two clans. But everything changed with the discovery of a ruby mine along their shared border. The bloodshed that followed shattered their relationship. Now, the joint training sessions continued solely because of imperial command. Adolphe had arrived on behalf of his brother to ensure this year's event proceeded without complications. Turning to Hugo, he remarked, "I've heard there's a supernova in the Baskerville family. A rare genius, born once in a century. A blessing to the Empire, no doubt." Though secretly pleased, Hugo downplayed the compliment. "It's nothing extraordinary," Adolphe smirked, detecting the subtle pride in Hugo's tone. "We, too, have a genius in our family," he said, gesturing toward the door. Mort's clan head Raspine's daughter, Camus. The door opened, revealing a red-haired girl with a fiery demeanor. She strode into the room with confidence, her sharp eyes immediately locking onto Hugo. Adolphe began a formal introduction, but Camus interrupted, pointing an accusatory finger at Hugo. "Are you the thief who stole our ruby mine? Give it back." The room fell into a tense silence. Hugo's face darkened, his calm demeanor giving way to a sharp glare directed at Adolphe. "Thief?" he asked coldly. "Is that what you're teaching your kin now?" Adolphe looked startled. "I never said such a thing." Camus, however, was unfazed. Fixing Adolphe with a determined glare, she declared, "You did. An hour and 42 minutes ago, right before we got off the carriage, you called him that annoying chin beard who stole the ruby mine." Hugo's glare deepened further as Adolphe stammered, his composure crumbling. "Camus, you must have misheard. I said no such thing." But Camus stood her ground, arms crossed. "You definitely said it." Hugo's patience was wearing thin. "It seems the Mords clan struggles with teaching children proper etiquette," he remarked, his voice laced with irritation. Adolphe, scrambling to salvage the situation, tried to defuse the tension. "It's simply a misunderstanding, Patriarch Baskerville. Camus is young and spirited." Hugo's sharp gaze remained fixed on him. "There's no need to explain the Mords clan's problems with education to me," he said icily. Camus, undeterred, persisted. Crossing her arms, she repeated her demand, her fiery tone cutting through the air. "Our research is impossible without those stolen rubies." Adolphe's voice turned warning. "Camus," but she ignored him, stepping closer to Hugo. Hugo's patience finally snapped. His voice was sharp, tinged with barely concealed anger. "It seems the Mords don't teach manners at all. Adolf bristled at the comment, his composure cracking. And what do you plan to do? He retorted, his words biting. Threaten an 8-year-old girl? The insult struck a nerve. Hugo's proud Baskerville dignity prevented him from stooping to such behavior, leaving him momentarily speechless. Before the tension could escalate further, a calm but cutting voice sliced through the heated exchange. It seems the morgues don't teach their children not to envy what belongs to others. All eyes turned toward the speaker, Vakir. He stood in the doorway alongside the head butler, his composed demeanor stark against the tension in the room. The butler formally announced his arrival as Hugo turned to see his son, standing steady and unruffled. Adolf, startled by Vakir's sudden appearance, quickly connected the dots. This boy had to be the rumored Baskerville supernova. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed something odd. Camus, who had been sitting beside him moments earlier, was no longer there. Camus had moved swiftly, now standing directly in front of Vakir. Her fiery demeanor was on full display as she demanded, "What did you just say?" Adolf called her name sharply, trying to stop her from causing a scene, but Camus ignored him entirely. Vakir, meanwhile, remained unruffled, studying her intently. As Vakir observed her, memories of Camus' future self surfaced in his mind. In time, she would rise as the Morgues clan's legendary iron-blooded empress, a figure revered and feared across the empire. Renowned as a genius of geniuses, Camus would create an era of unprecedented power for the Morgues clan. She was infamous for her ferocity, having eradicated the monsters and barbarians from life-engulfing forest to form the infamous border of blood and ashes. Her political acumen would even allow her to manipulate the imperial family, earning her the title Fire Goddess of Authority. But for now, Camus was just a child. A fiery, talented child, yes, but still far from the towering legend she would one day become. His musings were interrupted by Camus snapping. "Why does the ruby mine belong to you?" Remaining calm, Vakir countered, "Because it does. Your tantrum won't change that. Don't you think your behavior is childish?" Camus bristled at the remark, her irritation palpable. Without a word, she began casting a spell. Vakir instinctively prepared for an attack, but to his surprise, Camus conjured an intricate ice sculpture instead. She pointed at the sculpture, her tone defiant as she began explaining. "This is the joint security area," she said, using the sculpture as a visual aid. She pointed to a small cave carved into the icy representation. The mine entrance lies within Morgue's territory, but the vein itself runs beneath Baskerville land. This prevents you from claiming it entirely, but it also makes it impossible for us to mine freely without crossing into Baskerville territory. Her finger traced the icy veins with precision, her voice steady but laced with frustration. "We've offered, repeatedly, to pay rent for the use of the land, but your family rejects every proposal. You treat us like trespassers, interfering with our work." She turned to Vakir, her fiery eyes locking with his. "The ruby vein belongs to the Morgues clan," Camus declared firmly, "but your people keep claiming it's yours." Adolf nodded approvingly at Camus' explanation, his pride evident. Meanwhile, Hugo's expression darkened, annoyance brewing beneath his stoic exterior. Vakir, still calm and composed, interjected, "Rubies are common magic ingredients. The Baskervilles don't need them." Camus turned to him, her frustration evident. "Then why not rent your land if you don't need the rubies?" Vakir met her fiery gaze, his tone even. "The Baskervilles are fiercely protective of their land. We're uninterested in letting others profit from it. Entering Baskerville territory will bring losses, not gains, for your clan." Camus refused to accept his reasoning. With a determined glare, she placed her hand over the portion of her ice sculpture representing Baskerville land. "Then whose arm is this?" she asked defiantly. Vakir moved swiftly, catching her wrist in his grip. His confident smile returned. "It's my arm," he said coolly, "because it's in my land." Camus' face flushed crimson, caught off guard by his unexpected reply. She stammered, "W, what are you talking about? How could I belong to you?" Clearly amused, Vakir tilted his head, his grin turning mischievous. "Who said you're mine?" he teased, his tone ambiguous. Before Camus could respond, Vakir reached behind him and produced a knife. The sudden motion startled everyone in the room, Camus, Adolf, and even the head butler. Vakir's grin darkened, and his voice dropped. "What I'm saying," he said ominously, "is that your arm is mine." Camus froze, her fiery confidence shaken. "What?" she stammered, her voice trembling. Hugo, observing from his seat, broke into a cold sweat. The room grew thick with tension, the only sound Camus' faint, nervous hiccup. As Vakir moved the knife closer to her hand, Camus screamed, "Uncle, help!" Adolf appeared behind Vakir in an instant, his expression fierce. "Step away from my niece," he commanded, his voice full of protective fury. Camus seized the distraction to wrench her arm free, retreating quickly to Adolf's side. Shaken but defiant, She clung to her uncle's arm, glaring at Vikir. Adolphe turned his anger toward Hugo, his voice rising. What is going on here? Hugo, still sweating, turned his stern gaze to Vikir. You've gone too far with your joke, he said in a reprimanding tone. Vikir chuckled, raising the knife to reveal its harmless edge. It's just a toy, he explained, a Baskerville children's knife, given to us to practice with from a young age. The room fell silent for a moment. Adolphe's outrage returned with full force. A dangerous toy like that for children? This is unacceptable. Vikir bowed his head, his tone contrite. I apologize if I frightened Camus, he said. That wasn't my intention. Camus, however, was far from convinced, her fiery glare fixed on Vikir. Adolphe's frustration simmered. This boy fails to take anything seriously, he snapped. Hugo stepped in, his tone light but firm. Adults shouldn't meddle in the affairs of children, he said. Let's focus on the ruby mines and move on to the friendly duels. Adolphe hesitated, but seeing Hugo's resolve, he relented with a sharp nod. Camus, still upset and wiping away tears, turned to Vikir, her voice trembling with indignation. I won't forget this. Vikir met her glare with a faint, unreadable smile. Good, he said simply. Camus' fist clenched, her frustration bubbling over. But before she could respond, Adolphe guided her away. Vikir remained in place, his calm demeanor unwavering, his crimson eyes gleaming faintly in the dim light of the office. The day of the friendly duels had arrived. Children from both the Baskerville and Morgs clans, aged 8 to 15, gathered in the grand arena to showcase their skills. The younger participants displayed theoretical techniques and mana sensitivity, while the older children engaged in live combat. Yet, this year, all eyes were on one match. Camus Morgs versus Vikir Van Baskerville. Camus stood confidently in the arena, her fiery red hair catching the sunlight. She turned to Vikir, her expression sharp and determined. Get ready, she said firmly. I won't hold back. Without hesitation, Camus began casting a spell. Her intricate hand movements and the shimmering glow of mana captivated the audience. Spectators murmured in awe as her magical energy grew more intense. A voice in the crowd broke through the noise. Is she casting quadruspells? The exclamations turned to gasps of astonishment. Quadruspell casting, the ability to cast 4 spells simultaneously, was a feat that eluded even many adult mages. Seeing an 8-year-old achieve it left the audience awestruck. She really is the Morgs clan's genius mage, one spectator remarked. Exactly what we'd expect from someone like her. Camus unleashed a flurry of attacks, casting 4 powerful spells simultaneously. Fire, ice, wind, and earth magic surged toward Vikir with precision and force. But Vikir dodged effortlessly. His movements were fluid, almost casual. Shaking his head slightly, he spoke with a faint tone of criticism. Instead of showing off with flashy spells, maybe focus on mastering just one. Camus sneered. Her pride stung. Why do you even care? You're just an idiot who doesn't understand magic. With a swift incantation, she conjured a sand wall, a thick barrier of swirling grains, to separate them. But Vikir, unimpressed, broke through it with a single kick. The wall crumbled like paper, scattering in the wind. Camus froze, stunned. Is this the strength of someone who's bathed in the river Styx? Her mind raced, recalling the tales of the infamous Baskerville trial. But before she could regroup, Vikir moved in with lightning speed. Realizing too late that the attack was unavoidable, Camus shut her eyes, bracing for the blow. But it never came. When she opened her eyes, she found herself propelled backward. Not by a strike, but by a flick to her forehead. The sheer power of the flick sent her tumbling across the arena floor. On the sidelines, Adolphe stared in disbelief. A flick? That was just a flick. Camus winced, holding her forehead, her fiery demeanor shaken. Why did you flick me? Are you going easy on me? Vikir smiled faintly, tapping his own forehead. Maybe it's time to end this before things get out of hand. Camus' eyes watered with frustration, but she refused to yield. With a defiant shout, she cast another spell. This time, she conjured 2 sand walls, layered for extra protection. Try getting through this, she declared confidently. Vikir stood unbothered, considering walking around the walls entirely. But with a faint smirk, he decided to humor her. Drawing back his fist, he punched straight through both barriers. The sand wall shattered, leaving a clean hole in his wake. Camus froze, astonished, as Vikir stepped through the debris. As he approached her, Vikir mimicked a flicking motion with his hand. Whose arm crossed the wall? He asked, his tone calm and deliberate. Camus opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Vikir answered for her with another flick to her forehead. The stronger one, he said simply. The force of the flick sent Camus sprawling to the ground again. Growling in frustration, she pushed herself up, her fiery glare fixed on Vikir. Still ready to fight, she snarled, I'm not done yet. Vikir sighed inwardly. Dealing with children is harder than I thought. I could end this in zero point 0.1 seconds if I wanted to, but that would just cause more problems. Dodging Camus' relentless spells with ease, Vikir's sharp gaze wandered to another part of the arena. Two contestants, a sword apprentice and a mage, were locked in a duel. The swordsman's precise, powerful strikes tore through the mage's spells. An idea sparked in Vikir's mind. It might be useful for this. Meanwhile, Camus' frustration boiled over. "Stop running away and fight me," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. Vikir seized the opportunity, his tone calm but firm. "You might want to have a defensive spell ready." Camus blinked, momentarily confused by his sudden comment. Before she could process his warning, she noticed the mage behind Vikir preparing a large-scale attack. The intense glow of gathering mana filled the air. Adolf, observing from the sidelines, pieced together Vikir's plan. His voice rose in alarm. "Camus, watch out." The mage's spell erupted in a massive, fiery blast that engulfed the arena. Gasps and cries rippled through the audience as heat and blinding light consumed the battlefield. For a few tense moments, nothing was visible but flames and dust. In the chaos, Camus activated a defensive spell just in time, narrowly avoiding serious injury. But as the dust settled, she realized her clothes had been burned away by the flames. The crowd murmured in shock, their whispers growing louder. Camus froze. Tears welled up in her eyes as the horrifying reality sank in. She had been exposed in front of the entire audience. Her hands trembled as she tried to cover herself, humiliation washing over her. She heard her uncle Adolf calling her name, his voice filled with worry. How could this happen? She thought, her shame overwhelming. As the smoke began to clear, Vikir stepped forward. His calm figure emerged from the dissipating dust, unscathed and composed. The audience fell silent, their attention fixed on him. Vikir approached Camus, shrugging off his jacket as he reached her. To the crowd's surprise, he draped it over her shoulders. "You'll need this," he said simply, his voice steady. Camus stared at him in shock, her face flushed. "But you'll be exposed if you give me your only jacket." Vikir brushed off her concern with a faint smile, his tone light but resolute. "It doesn't matter." Camus, still reeling from the chaos, struggled to understand why her supposed rival would offer her kindness. Her confusion deepened when she noticed a thin line of blood trailing down Vikir's arm. "You're hurt," she said, pointing at the wound. Vikir glanced down, momentarily surprised. He hadn't expected his body, strengthened by the river Styx, to be scratched. Examining the cut more closely, he realized the swordsman's blade in the adjacent duel must have carried lingering aura. As the dust fully settled, the scene came into focus for the audience. Camus sat on the ground, wrapped in Vikir's jacket, her fiery demeanor momentarily subdued. Beside her stood Vikir, his shirtless figure revealing a small but noticeable wound on his arm. The crowd murmured in awe, their gazes drawn to Vikir's impressive physique. Despite his young age, his toned muscles and disciplined build stood as a testament to the brutal training of a Baskerville hound. Among the spectators, admiration for Vikir was growing. But for Camus, the situation was more complicated. Her cheeks burned with a faint blush as her gaze kept drifting toward Vikir. "Why am I feeling like this?" She wondered, her earlier anger replaced by an unfamiliar sensation. Even as her uncle Adolf pulled her into a protective hug, her thoughts remained on Vikir. Later, Vikir walked alongside Hugo down a dimly lit hallway, breaking the silence. Hugo's voice was calm but probing. "How was the battle with the Mord's girls?" Vikir answered thoughtfully. "It was interesting. I learned the purpose of the event once again." Hugo nodded slightly. "A battle with a mage is different from a duel between swordsmen. Why didn't you go for a decisive blow?" Vikir hesitated before admitting. "I wasn't sure how to handle a lady in battle." Hugo's expression hardened. "Letting your guard down will only lead to injury. Take this scratch as a lesson." The unexpected concern in Hugo's tone gave Vikir pause. This isn't the Hugo I remember, Vikir thought. The Hugo he knew had been strict, cold, and brutal, his emotions as unyielding as stone. Rumors whispered that Hugo's harshness stemmed from the loss of his first wife and eldest daughter, but such things had never been Vikir's concern. Yet now, hearing a faint trace of worry in Hugo's voice, Vikir felt a rare moment of unease. Seeking to shift the subject, Hugo asked, "What do you think we should do with the ruby mines?" Without hesitation, Vikir replied, "We should give control of the mines to the Morgs." Hugo's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "And your reasoning?" "The Baskervilles' primary focus is territorial expansion," Vikir explained. "The monsters and barbarians around the mines will be obstacles if we try to claim the region directly. By allowing the Morgs control of the mines, we can use them to minimize our losses. Their presence will draw the threats into that area, allowing us to handle everything at once." Hugo listened carefully, his sharp mind processing Vikir's words. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. Interesting, he said. Once the Mords assign a large number of people to the mines, we'll push the monsters and barbarians into that region. The ruby veins will be soaked in their blood, and the Mords will think twice before stepping onto our land again. Placing a hand on Vikir's head, Hugo said, "Your idea aligns with about 90% of what I had in mind." Impressive. Vikir accepted the praise silently, his expression composed. Inside, he mused on the irony. This plan was originally Hugo's idea. Vikir had carried it out on his orders in his previous life. Now, seeing it unfold from this perspective brought an odd sense of satisfaction. To conclude, Vikir added, "We should keep a close eye on the Mord's movements." Hugo dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "There's no need. I've already increased the number of hounds scouting the area." Vikir nodded, choosing to keep his thoughts to himself. As they continued walking, a familiar voice rang out behind them, stopping them in their tracks. "Hugo, I have something to discuss before I leave." Turning toward the source, they saw Adolf approaching, his expression serious. Hugo nodded, gesturing toward a nearby room. "Let's talk." Once seated, Hugo leaned back in his chair. "What is it you want to discuss?" Adolf wasted no time. "I think it's time to resolve the issues surrounding the ruby mines peacefully," he began. Hugo raised an eyebrow. "Peacefully?" Adolf continued. "We could implement usage fees, but I have another suggestion, an engagement between the Morgs and Baskerville children." As the two patriarchs discussed the potential union, Camus sat nearby. Her gaze occasionally drifted toward Vikir, her cheeks faintly flushed. Hugo noticed this, leaning forward with subtle interest. "Which children do you have in mind?" he asked. Adolf smiled confidently. "The eldest son of the Baskerville clan and the eldest daughter of the Morgs, my niece Camus. She's exceptional, beautiful, intelligent, talented. She lacks nothing and would make an ideal match." Hugo raised an eyebrow. "My eldest son is 25. That's a 17-year age gap." Adolf waved the concern away. "What's a mere 17 years? In the grand scheme of things, it's nothing." Before Hugo could respond, Camus interjected firmly. "I will not marry anyone weaker than my mother. And I don't want a significant age gap in my partner." Adolf's face twisted in frustration as he turned to his niece. "Camus, if you insist on marrying someone stronger than your mother, you'll be alone for the rest of your life. That's not a realistic demand." Hugo, clearly displeased, added dryly, "Engagements aren't a buffet where you can pick and choose. Consider the bigger picture." But Camus, confident and unwavering, crossed her arms. "I have no intention of playing around." Suddenly, Camus' face flushed a deep red, and she looked away, drawing the attention of both Hugo and Adolf. Adolf followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing as realization dawned. She was looking at Vikir. Adolf's mind reeled. "No, this can't be happening. Not him." Leaning toward her, Adolf hissed in a harsh whisper, "Don't even think about it. Vikir is of the Van surname, not from the Lil lineage. He's a small fish in a big pond. This is absurd." Hugo, sensing the rising tension, sighed and decided to intervene. "The most important thing in an engagement," he said, "is the opinion of those involved. Let's hear what Vikir has to say." All eyes turned to Vikir. Camus looked at him expectantly, her blush deepening as the room fell silent. Meeting her gaze, Vikir's calm voice broke through the tension. "I accept." The room erupted into chaos. Adolf's face turned beet red. He opened his mouth to object, but before he could say a word, Vikir added, "To do as I'm told." Adolf's outrage doubled, his voice rising. "What kind of attitude is that toward the Morgs clan's daughter?" Camus, on the other hand, was completely flustered. Her face turned crimson as she tried to decipher Vikir's cryptic response. Is he shy? Does this mean he's secretly okay with the engagement? Her mind raced with possibilities, each more baffling than the last. Hugo, clearly amused by the situation, interjected with a composed tone. "In the Baskerville household, names and titles hold little meaning. Greatness comes from ability, not bloodline. Even those of Van descent can rise to prominence." Adolf's expression remained skeptical, his eyes narrowing as he turned to scrutinize Vikir. The young Baskerville stood tall, calm and unyielding under Adolf's piercing gaze. Internally, however, Vikir was assessing Adolf just as carefully. As a six-circle mage and one of the Mords clan's strongest supporters, Adolf was undeniably formidable. Breaking the silence, Adolf said coldly, "I don't think it's wise to rush this. We can't have just anyone become Camus' husband." Vikir reflected on the peculiar customs of the clans, where engagements often felt more like polite suggestions than binding agreements. Still, he couldn't help but wonder if Adolf, with his lofty standards, was dissatisfied even with the renowned genius of the Baskerville clan. Adolf's skepticism grew as he stepped closer, placing a firm hand on Vikir's shoulder. He applied pressure, clearly testing the boy. But to Adolf's surprise, Vikir didn't budge. His sturdy frame defied expectations, as though the weight of a six-circle mage was nothing to him. Intrigued, Adolf asked sharply, "Why aren't you responding? Are you even paying attention?" Vikir's blunt reply was like a thunderclap in the room. "I stopped listening after you said it was unwise to say certain things to me." Camus gasped audibly, her eyes wide. Her uncle, one of the most powerful mages in the clan, had been dismissed by a child. Meanwhile, Hugo struggled to stifle his laughter, turning away to hide the smirk threatening to break across his face. Adolf, instead of anger, erupted in a dark, booming laugh. Turning to Hugo, he declared, "I think I need to have a more in-depth conversation with this boy." Hugo raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "What are you planning, Adolf? You're not going to scold an 8-year-old, are you?" Adolf laughed again, the sound echoing ominously. "Not as a deputy patriarch of the Mord's clan. I'm speaking as her uncle. After all, Vikir might one day marry my niece." Camus' face turned crimson. "Uncle, stop it," she pleaded, but Adolf ignored her protests. "These moments are inevitable, Camus," he said, waving her off. Hugo, sensing where this was heading, gave Adolf a skeptical look. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Adolf nodded, his expression grimly amused. "Completely." Hugo sighed, hesitant but ultimately relenting. "Fine," he said, "but don't take it too far. The last thing we need is a political incident over a conversation." Camus groaned in frustration. "This isn't a conversation," she muttered, crossing her arms. It quickly became clear to everyone in the room. This wasn't going to be a talk. It was a duel. After some time, Vikir and Adolf stood face to face in the center of the arena, tension crackling in the air. Hugo and Camus watched from the sidelines, each with their own thoughts. Adolf smirked and declared, "Show me everything you've got, boy. Don't hold back." Vikir's confidence barely wavered. "If I actually go all out, you might end up face first on the floor," he mused, suppressing a grin. To kick things off, Adolf performed an intricate spell, seamlessly combining fire, earth, and water magic to create a clay pot. He filled it with water and balanced it on his head with a flourish. "Your challenge," he announced, "is to make even a single drop spill. If you succeed, you win." Vikir raised an eyebrow. "A pot-on-head challenge? This guy's either crazy confident or crazy." Camus leaned toward Hugo. "This is classic Adolf," she explained. "His control is basically unmatched." Vikir analyzed the setup. Charging straight at Adolf might not work, but it'd give him valuable intel. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, sword in hand, aiming directly for his opponent. "Vikir, no!" Camus cried, horrified by his reckless approach. Adolf didn't flinch. He raised a hand, casting a shimmering barrier that effortlessly absorbed Vikir's strike. "Rookie mistake," Adolf said smugly, glancing at Camus. "Why are you helping him? Shield magic makes swordsmen like him obsolete." Vikir clicked his tongue, frustrated but unfazed. Adolf, clearly enjoying himself, launched a series of flashy spells. Fireballs, wind blades, and earth spikes flew toward Vikir, but he dodged them all with cat-like agility. From the sidelines, Camus seethed. "He never used this much magic against me," she shouted. Adolf turned to her, feigning betrayal. "Et2, Camus? My own niece, rooting for the enemy." He returned his gaze to Vikir, playful menace gleaming in his eyes. "You'll pay for that." Hugo stayed quiet, watching intently. Vikir's movements were sharp, his strikes precise. "Let's see how far he can push Adolf," Hugo murmured to himself. Vikir observed Adolf's techniques closely, replaying memories from his past life and adapting them to his current form. Adolf bragged, "No sword can break my shield." But cracks began to form as Vikir struck the same spot over and over, his attacks like a perfectly tuned machine. Adolf's smug grin faltered. Persistent little, before he could finish, Vikir's sword shattered. Adolf immediately regained his composure. "Amateur mistake," he taunted. "You ignored your weapon's durability." But the air shifted. Hugo and Camus exchanged knowing glances as Adolf continued his mockery, oblivious to the danger. Water poured down Adolf's face, soaking him completely. He froze. "What the?" He glared at the shattered pot above him. "How did a shard pierce my shield and the pot?" Vikir, calm and composed, simply shrugged. "Maybe it was too full." Camus stood frozen, cheeks flushed as the weight of the moment hit her. Vikir had defeated her invincible Uncle Adolf. Her thoughts spiraled. "He's amazing. Is this fate?" Images of wedding bells and matching outfits flashed through her mind. Meanwhile, Hugo stood in silent contemplation, his gaze fixed on Vikir. This wasn't just talent or luck. It was raw potential. Am I raising a hound far more powerful than I imagined? 7 grueling years passed. The young hounds, now honed by relentless training, faced their ultimate test, a monstrous hornbear. The beast charged, its roar shaking the ground. In perfect unison, the hounds launched their attack, swords slicing with precision. From the sidelines, their instructor, Staffordshire Baskerville, watched with a calculating eye. "Stop wasting your energy on its vital points," he barked. "Go for the hind legs, slow it down first." The triplets responded instantly, their crimson auras flaring as they executed synchronized strikes. The beast staggered, its movements slowing. Staffordshire nodded in approval. "Good. That's how Baskervilles fight. As a pack." With the monster weakened, the remaining hounds moved in for the kill, finishing it with a coordinated assault. Staffordshire clapped his hands. "Congratulations. You're now lower-rank sword experts and have mastered the first Baskerville technique." But his tone turned grim. This was a controlled environment. Out there in the life-engulfing forest, the ox bears won't be caged or predictable. One mistake, and you're dead. Your bloodline strength is your lifeline. Don't waste it. His words hung heavy in the air as the young hounds absorbed the harsh truth. Their 7-year training had officially ended, but their journey was only beginning. The newly minted hounds buzzed with excitement, discussing their futures. 2 of them debated their preferences for the Baskerville clan's 7 night orders. "I'm all about the Wolfhound order," the first said, puffing his chest. "Guarding the Patriarch? That's peak prestige. Wolfhound's cool," the second replied, "but I'm eyeing the Doberman, Pitbull, and Rottweiler orders. Assassination and all-out warfare? Now that's my vibe." Their banter shifted to a figure sitting atop the massive carcass of a slain ox bear, Vikir. "Who's that?" the second asked, intrigued. The first gestured toward Vikir. "That's the Vikir. Took down an ox bear twice the size of ours." He leaned closer, voice filled with awe. "He's already a high-level sword expert and mastered the third Baskerville technique. He's on par with the Shadow Hounds." Sitting on the slain beast, Vikir stared into the distance, lost in thought. His progress had been substantial. He'd reached the 5th Baskerville technique and graduated as an intermediate-rank swordsman. But to him, it felt agonizingly slow. 7 years, and still, I'm far from where I need to be. His brooding was interrupted by the arrival of Barrymore, the head butler. "Master Vikir," Barrymore said with a bow, "the Patriarch requests your presence. Your assignment has been decided." Vikir rose, his expression unreadable. "All right," he replied, sheathing his sword. The time for training was over. A new chapter awaited. Vikir stepped into the Patriarch's office, greeted by Hugo's signature grunt. His sharp eyes immediately caught a small cut on Hugo's nose. "Rough fight?" Vikir asked, curious. Hugo smirked. "Barbarians in a life-engulfing forest. Outmatched by an archer," he admitted, before adding with a satisfied grin. "But I left her a matching souvenir." After a brief silence, Hugo congratulated Vikir on his graduation, but his tone carried an edge. "Things will only get tougher from here," he warned. Vikir's mind wandered. This had to be about his new assignment. Memories of his previous life surfaced. Back then, as a junior knight of the Pitbull Order, he'd endured 21 brutal months in a life-engulfing forest. Just another expendable soldier in the Baskerville clan's ruthless system. At 15, Baskerville children were divided into 2 paths, elites or expendables. The expendables, like Vikir before his regression, were sent to the front lines, survival being their only measure of worth. Meanwhile, the elites received political and administrative training, protected by the expendables who lived long enough to serve them. Vikir knew the 5th Baskerville sword technique was designed to close the gap between the elite's polished training and the expendables' hard-earned battlefield experience. Before his regression, he'd never progressed beyond the 4th technique. Worse, as an illegitimate child, he'd never been considered for the elite path. Hugo's voice cut through his thoughts. "I want you to try the lower house of parliament." Vikir blinked. "What?" "The lower house manages the clan's regional administration. Law enforcement, infrastructure, economic oversight, its politics and pragmatism combined. Far from the battlefield." The idea shocked Vikir. Hugo, the patriarch of the Baskerville clan, was offering an illegitimate son an elite position? It felt like a cruel joke. As if reading his thoughts, Hugo leaned back. "Your achievements by 10 surpassed our so-called geniuses. You've earned this." Vikir listened as Hugo explained his role. Deputy Consul of Underdog City, a city notorious for its challenges. Both the consul and deputy consul positions were vacant, leaving Vikir with a clean slate. "Do you want it?" Hugo asked. After a moment's consideration, Vikir nodded. "I'll take it." Before the conversation could end, Vikir shifted topics. About the Mord's clan and the Ruby Mines, Hugo's lips twitched, clearly aware. "Outmaneuvered Adolph Morgs, didn't you?" Vikir nodded and made a bold request. To borrow his reward from the incident. The head butler froze, his shock evident. But Hugo didn't flinch. Stamping a document, he handed it over. "Don't make me regret this." "I won't," Vikir said firmly, though his stomach churned at the sound of Hugo's final words. "Good luck, son." The word hit like a thunderclap. Before his regression, Hugo would never have called him son. As Vakir and the head butler walked down the hallway, the butler's grave tone broke the silence. Master Hugo holds you in high regard. Assigning a consulship before a battle posting, unprecedented. It's part of the disciplines of kingship. His words implied that Hugo was grooming Vakir for far greater responsibilities. Vakir, however, wasn't one to bask in praise. He knew this appointment wasn't a reward but a challenge. This was a chance to sharpen his skills in a less dangerous environment. Even so, memories of his past life refused to let him relax. The cold sensation of the guillotine's blade haunted him. That vivid memory fueled his resolve. Someday, Hugo La Baskerville would feel the same icy despair. Meanwhile, in Underdog City, a bustling villa buzzed with activity. A bald man barked orders at two workers. The villa must be spotless by tomorrow. The new deputy consul arrives then. One worker, wiping sweat from his brow, muttered, "I hope he knows business." His companion snorted. Business? The guy's only 15. Their speculation was interrupted by a boy approaching the villa. Mistaking him for a servant's child, one worker placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hey kid, whose son are you?" The boy's glare was icy. "Remove your hand." The workers exchanged glances, taken aback, as the boy produced a document. "I'm Vakir van Baskerville," he announced coolly, "your new deputy consul." The men stood dumbfounded, their eyes darting between Vakir and the papers. One finally stammered, "But you're early." Ignoring their confusion, Vakir strode inside, issuing his first order. "Prepare food and drinks. We're hosting a party tonight." By nightfall, the villa was a whirlwind of celebration. Nobles mingled, tables groaned under feasts, and laughter echoed through the halls. Yet not everyone was in a festive mood. Chihuahua Baskerville, the general secretary of Underdog City, was pacing in his office. From his window, he could see the lavish party raging below. His fists clenched. "Unbelievable," he muttered. The city was already reeling from corrupt officials, and every deputy consul before Vakir had been sacked for bribe-taking. Now, the new appointee, just a kid, was throwing a party on his first day? Chihuahua's indignation turned to alarm as he suddenly felt a presence behind him. "Are you the general secretary?" Chihuahua whirled around, nearly tripping over himself. Standing in the shadows, calm and composed, was Vakir. Yes. Yes, that's me." Chihuahua stammered, trying to regain his composure. Vakir stepped into the light, his piercing gaze unsettling. "Vakir van Baskerville, your new deputy consul." Chihuahua swallowed nervously, but managed to introduce himself. Vakir repeated his name thoughtfully, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "No middle name?" Vakir mused aloud, his tone light yet pointed. Chihuahua braced for ridicule. In Baskerville hierarchy, a missing middle name marked one as an outsider, an employee, not family. He had endured years of discrimination because of it. When Vakir placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Nice," he flinched internally, expecting sarcasm. Instead, Vakir's tone was calm. "I reviewed your background on the way here. Born and raised in Underdog City, right? You've done well. I won't interfere with how you manage things." Chihuahua blinked, his confusion palpable. "Okay," he muttered, unsure if this was a genuine compliment or some strange new form of harassment. Vakir's tone shifted, growing more serious. "Your management of the personal law system is commendable, but the judicial system here is another matter. The problem isn't just illegal businesses. It's that the underground economy has more power than the law." Chihuahua hesitated before replying. "So, shut down the illegal businesses? That won't be enough," Vakir countered. "The heads of these operations need to be removed. And to do that, we need a new law." "A new law?" Chihuahua repeated, startled. Vakir nodded. "Within a week, the underground economy will be in shambles. But I need a cause, something to justify creating and enforcing this law." Chihuahua furrowed his brow. "Why do you need a cause? Isn't it enough to act against illegal businesses?" Vakir smirked, his gaze sharp. "I'm a 15-year-old deputy consul. Without a strong performance, I'm just a kid with a fancy title. This isn't about acting. It's about proving I can win." His expression twisted into a mischievous grin as he added, "To put it simply, I'll lay out poop for the flies." Chihuahua stood there dumbfounded. What in the world was this kid planning? The next day, Vakir arrived at Dort Smile Street, Underdog City's bustling downtown hub. Crowds had already gathered, their curiosity piqued by the rumors of their new deputy consul's first public action. Standing on a makeshift stage, Vakir held a large stake in his hand, his calm demeanor commanding attention. Chihuahua and the other officials stood nearby, exchanging puzzled glances. Since dawn, Vakir had been on that stage, silently biding his time. Finally, he stepped forward and introduced himself. "I am Vakir van Baskerville, your new deputy consul." The crowd buzzed with surprise, their whispers swelling like a tide. Many found it hard to believe that someone so young could hold such a high position. While a few onlookers murmured that Vakir was cute, Most questioned what someone his age could possibly achieve. Undeterred, Vikir raised his voice, addressing the crowd with confidence. He reminded them of the Baskerville family's long-standing laws, unwavering and as strict as ever, regardless of who held office. But skepticism was thick in the air. Doubts about his age, ability, and resolve rippled through the crowd. Some muttered bitterly about the corruption of past officials, assuming Vikir would inevitably fall into the same trap. Standing beside him, Chihuahua clenched his fists. Unable to stay silent, he snapped at the crowd, demanding respect for the new deputy consul. His sharp tone momentarily hushed the murmurs, though many still whispered that Chihuahua seemed better suited for the role than the boy standing on the stage. Then, Vikir acted. With a display of raw strength, he hoisted the large stake high above his head. In one powerful motion, he drove it into the ground with such force that the earth seemed to tremble. Gasps spread through the audience, their skepticism giving way to astonishment. Before the awe could fade, Vikir made his move. Standing tall, he declared the introduction of a new decree, the Vikir Special Law. The first provision, he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd, is simple. Anyone who pulls this stake from the ground will be rewarded with 100 million gold, personally paid by me. The crowd erupted in disbelief. 100 million? They shouted, their voices blending into a chaotic cacophony of awe and doubt. Could it really be that simple? Could pulling out a stake make someone unimaginably rich? Yet, despite the excitement, no one stepped forward. Vikir's sharp eyes scanned the hesitant faces, his gaze daring someone to take the challenge. What's wrong? He taunted. Does no one have the guts to try? When the silence persisted, he smirked and raised the stakes, literally. Paragraph 1, Article 2, he declared. The prize is now 1 billion gold to the person who pulls out this stake. Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. 1 billion gold was beyond anyone's wildest imagination, a life-changing fortune. The murmurs turned feverish as the audience grappled with the sheer magnitude of the reward. Amid the tension, a loud, mocking laugh cut through the noise. An overweight man lumbered forward, his face twisted in disdain. What is this nonsense? Do you take us for fools? He barked. No one's going to fall for such a ridiculous stunt. But someone in the crowd, quieter yet no less intrigued, muttered, 1 billion isn't exactly pocket change. The mood shifted. Whispers of curiosity and hesitation rippled through the audience. Behind Vikir, Chihuahua was more perplexed than ever. Why weren't they the ones embarrassed by this spectacle? Why was the crowd the one feeling the pressure? Unfazed by the noise, Vikir remained calm, his presence commanding. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the whispers. So, he asked, his tone sharp and direct, is there no one brave enough to accept the challenge? The crowd fell silent once again, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. When no one stepped forward, Vikir raised the stakes once more. His calm voice carried over the hushed crowd. The reward is now 10 billion gold. The crowd collectively froze, their disbelief palpable. Whispers rippled through the gathering. This has to be a joke, someone murmured. Don't be stupid, another cautioned. Look at his sword. If you seem too greedy, he might cut you down. Despite the unimaginable prize, fear and hesitation kept everyone rooted in place. Beside Vikir, Chihuahua leaned in, whispering anxiously. Deputy Consul, there isn't enough money in the city to back that promise. Before Vikir could reply, a small hand shot up from the crowd. I'll try, said a timid voice. Gasps echoed through the audience. All eyes turned to the source, a frail young girl clutching a basket of flowers. Judy? The flower girl, an old man muttered, stepping forward as if to stop her. Child, don't. But Judy shook her head, determination flickering in her eyes. My mother is sick. I have no choice. The crowd whispered in astonishment as she approached the stage, her movements hesitant yet resolute. Standing before the massive stake, Judy glanced nervously at Vikir, who towered over her with an unreadable expression. Vikir spoke a single word, pull. His voice was calm, devoid of any hint of mockery or encouragement. Judy couldn't tell if he was serious or testing her. With trembling hands, she wrapped her fingers around the stake. Taking a deep breath, she pulled with all her strength. To everyone's shock, the stake slid out effortlessly, as though it had been planted in sand. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Mouths hung open, eyes wide in disbelief. How could a frail little girl succeed where no one else dared to try? Judy stared at the stake in her hands, unsure of what to do next. She glanced nervously at Vikir, her heart racing when she saw him reach for his sword. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought of her sick mother and the consequences of her boldness. But instead of cold steel, something warm and heavy landed in her hands. Startled, she opened her eyes to see Vikir kneeling before her, holding out a small bag. For now, here's 100 million gold, he said calmly. Judy froze, clutching the bag tightly as the weight of his words sank in. Was this real? Bakir rose to his feet, his tone businesslike. Where's your home? He asked. 10 billion gold is too heavy to carry. I'll have it delivered with a guard to protect it. Placing a hand gently on Judy's head, Bakir spoke with quiet authority. This is the law. It must always be obeyed. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of murmurs and gasps. Bakir had done the unthinkable. He had kept his outlandish promise. Even Chihuahua, standing on the stage, was left slack-jawed, unable to process what he had just witnessed. This bold performance was a turning point. The Bakir special law swept through the city, becoming the talk of Underdog. It overshadowed even the Baskerville clan's long-standing governance law. For the first time, people saw the young deputy consul as more than just a figurehead. He was someone who kept his word, no matter how audacious it seemed. Citizens were deeply moved by the simple fairness of the law, rewards for those who upheld it and consequences for those who broke it. Word of Bakir's commitment spread like wildfire. Unlike his corrupt predecessors, Bakir wasn't about greed or empty promises. He was earning the city's respect. In a matter of weeks, the atmosphere in Underdog City began to shift. Crime rates plummeted, and for the first time in years, the streets felt safer. The people began to take pride in their leadership. In the deputy consul's office, Chihuahua was scribbling on a board when Bakir approached, noting that the text was written in the Eastern language. Impressive handwriting, Bakir remarked casually, sparking a conversation. Still reeling from the earlier spectacle, Chihuahua confessed, Deputy Consul, I've lived in this city for 2 decades, and I've never seen anything like today. It was inspiring. Bakir offered a faint smile. Fear and wrath can only go so far. Trust in the law is what matters. Today wasn't about theatrics. It was about trust. Chihuahua, visibly moved, stepped forward and bowed deeply. You have my loyalty, sir. From this day forward, I will serve you for the rest of my life. Relax, Chihuahua. You're going to overheat, Bakir teased, but his thoughts were already drifting. Reflecting on his success, Bakir couldn't help but think of a future that once was. He remembered Camus Morgues, whose iron-fisted rule had once brought crime rates to an impressive 1%. But her methods relied on fear, alienating the people she ruled. Bakir was determined to forge a better path, one that earned loyalty, not resentment. Turning to the map spread out on his desk, Bakir marked several locations. These were potential hideouts and operational bases for illegal groups. The real challenges are just beginning, he murmured. The 10 billion gold reward had already been spent. Now it was time to recover those funds. Pointing to the marked areas, he laid out his plan to monitor these locations and confiscate the dirty money fueling the city's criminal networks. Chihuahua leaned over the map, intrigued. How do you know these are their bases? With a smirk, Bakir tapped his nose. I can smell them. The truth, of course, was far less mystical. Bakir's memories from before his regression had provided him with precise knowledge of these operations. While Chihuahua marveled at his investigative prowess, Bakir kept his advantage to himself, confident that his next steps would tighten his grip on the city's underground economy. Their conversation was interrupted by a staff member bursting into the room. Deputy Consul, he announced, the Village Hall's Youth Autonomy Association has requested a meeting. Chihuahua didn't seem surprised. It's about time, he muttered. Bakir, however, scowled. Arrogant bastards, he said bluntly. What do they want? Chihuahua explained. The Youth Autonomy Association is made up of second and third generation members from Baskerville's 7 founding families. Despite the grand name, it's just a rowdy social club for entitled brats. He shrugged. They probably have opinions about the Bakir special law. Bakir's grin was sharp, his tone cutting. The dung flies have started to smell the bait. Both Chihuahua and the staff member blinked, momentarily speechless. Bakir's cold smirk deepened. Let's deal with the pests gnawing at the city's foundations. Meanwhile, deep within the burning suspension, a high-end club in Underdog City's most luxurious hotel, a raucous party was underway. In the VVIP lounge, rented for a staggering 10 million gold for just 6 hours, the 7 key members of the Youth Autonomy Association reveled in extravagance. These second and third generation heirs of Baskerville's most influential families were steeped in privilege. The room buzzed with laughter as they built a pyramid of glasses, pouring expensive wine over it and letting the liquid cascade dramatically across the table. The blonde ringleader of the group smirked as he turned to the waiters. Drink it, he ordered, gesturing to the wine pooling on the table. Without hesitation, the waiters complied, lapping up the spilled wine like obedient dogs. Thank you, sir, for the privilege, one muttered, wiping his mouth. Reclining on a plush sofa, the blonde man chuckled. No matter how recklessly I spend, my money always comes back to me, he bragged. One of his companions nodded, raising a glass. Thanks to the Baskervilles, of course. All that territorial expansion gives us an endless supply of barbarians to kidnap and sell as slaves. Another laughed. The Baskervilles' ambitions are a blessing. They're like our personal hunting dogs, always there to protect us. Protect us, the blonde man scoffed. They're just sword-wielding idiots we can manipulate. Leaning forward, he added with a grin, remember when we orchestrated that conflict between the Mesamadrano and Baskerville clans? The Baskervilles wiped them out without even realizing they'd been played. The group burst into laughter, toasting their cleverness. As the laughter died down, one of them brought up the new deputy consul. What about this Vikir van Baskerville? The blonde man sneered. Oh, never heard of him. The group shook their heads, equally unimpressed. Well, the blonde man said, his grin widening. How about we teach the boy a lesson? We'll invite him to a lavish party, ply him with expensive drinks and women, and then stick him with the bill. The group roared with laughter at the thought. Think about it, the blonde continued. The kid wouldn't dare report us. A 15-year-old deputy consul? He'd ruin himself trying to pay. As they finalized their plan, the waiter entered with a group of women in tow, their arrival announced with a flourish. The group's attention shifted immediately, their laughter giving way to eager anticipation for the night's indulgences. As the party raged on, one of the companions noticed an unfamiliar young man standing among the women. His brow furrowed. Who's that kid? He demanded. The waiter stammered nervously. He entered with so much confidence that no one stopped him. The young man stepped forward, and the room fell silent as recognition began to dawn. It was none other than Vikir himself. The blonde man, smirking to hide his unease, gestured for a waiter to handle the situation. The waiter grabbed Vikir by the hair, yanking him forward. Who do you think you are, barging in here? He snarled. Vikir's cold, glowing eyes froze the room. A tension so thick it felt like suffocating blanketed the space. Without a word, Vikir twisted the waiter's arm at an unnatural angle, eliciting a howl of pain that sent shivers through the group. The companions froze, staring in disbelief as Vikir calmly stepped forward. One of them, his voice shaking, stammered, Deputy Consul Vikir? Why are you here? Vikir's reply was short and cutting. You invited me. The blonde man forced a laugh, his tone overly jovial. Well, isn't this incredible? The Deputy Consul has graced our humble party. What an honor. Vikir didn't respond. He sat silently, his sharp gaze scanning the room as the blonde man leaned in to whisper to a companion. Their hushed tones weren't subtle enough to escape Vikir's trained ears. Let's move ahead with the plan, the blonde man murmured. Keep him here, and when it's over, stick him with the bill. The companion smirked. Let's see if he even tries to fight it. Vikir's patience snapped, slamming his hand down on the table. The entire surface exploded with a deafening crack, sending glass, drinks, and the champagne tower crashing to the floor. The room descended into chaos as the stunned partygoers struggled to process what had just happened. The blonde man's eyes widened in shock. He stared at the shattered remnants of the table, his mind racing. Did he use mana for that? The realization hit him like a blow. Vikir wasn't just a child. He was a trained Baskerville, one of the most dangerous warriors in the territory. One companion, trembling, whispered angrily, "We underestimated him." The blonde man snapped back, "Do something." But the companion shook his head, visibly terrified. "We don't stand a chance." Vikir leaned forward, his hand landing heavily on the shoulder of one of the companions. The man froze under his icy gaze, panic flooding his features. "Well, we'll pay for the drinks ourselves," the man blurted out desperately. Vikir's expression darkened. "Were you planning to make me pay for everything?" His voice was cold, each word a dagger of accusation. The companion's face shifted from panic to regret, realizing the depth of their mistake. Another companion nervously laughed, trying to diffuse the tension. Who would even dare think of doing something so ridiculous? The blonde man forced an awkward laugh, jumping in. "It's all a misunderstanding. We were just testing you, to see if you're strong enough to resist the city's corruption." "Exactly," another chimed in hastily. "And it looks like you've passed. You're just the kind of leader Underdog City needs." Vikir's piercing gaze silenced their excuses. Without warning, he lunged at the man sitting closest to him. In one swift motion, his palm struck the man's stomach with a claw-like grip, driving him backward with devastating force. The man gasped in pain as Vikir leaned in, his voice low but firm. "An owner can test their dog," he said coldly, "but a dog should never test its owner. Ever." The room plunged into an uneasy silence as Vikir's icy gaze swept across the group. His voice was calm, but razor-sharp. "Have you grown so complacent with your wealth and power that my actions don't move you?" His eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what real fear looks like." Without hesitation, he threw the man beneath his grip to the ground and stomped on his face. The sickening crunch reverberated through the room. Vikir straightened and looked back at the others. "Do you even know why I'm doing this? If not, perhaps you all need the same lesson." The blonde man's face turned deathly pale. Stammering, he insisted, We understand perfectly. There's no need for more." Vikir's expression darkened. If you really understood, you'd already know what's coming next. He delivered a sharp kick to the downed man, eliciting a groan of pain. Tension boiled over. The blond man spat. "You bastard." Another sneered, his voice dripping with scorn. "Do you really think you can get away with this?" In an instant, Vikir closed the distance between them, standing mere inches from the second man. His voice was cold and unyielding. "You're guilty of abduction, kidnapping, illegal slave trafficking, and insulting Baskerville authority." The room froze. The companions' faces contorted in shock. How could Vikir possibly know the details of their crimes? Before they could react, Vikir's fist collided with the second man's face, sending him sprawling to the ground. "Animals don't learn until they're taught," Vikir said, his tone dripping with disdain. His lips curled into a sinister grin. "And now, I'll teach you disobedient creatures what happens when you defy the law." In the dim confines of a prison cell, two figures stood in stark contrast. Vikir, calm and composed, regarded the scene with indifference, while General Secretary Chihuahua looked visibly shaken. Before them, the blond man, his face swollen and bloodied, screamed profanities. His voice echoed harshly off the stone walls. "You think this ends here?" The blond man snarled, venom in his tone. "The moment I'm out of here, I'll have both of your heads on spikes. My father will never forgive this." Chihuahua, unnerved by the outburst, turned to Vikir. "Deputy Consul," he began cautiously, "did you really have to go this far?" Vikir glanced at him, his faint smirk betraying no remorse. "Do you think I overdid it?" Chihuahua's response was emphatic. "Yes. Look at him. He's barely human anymore. You've turned him into a meat bag." Vikir's smile didn't waver. He strode toward the cell, his voice calm but laced with menace. This is nothing. I haven't even started." Chihuahua's unease deepened. "What are you planning?" he asked, his tone wary. Vikir's response was chilling. "I'm going to purge all the corrupt civil servants who've twisted the Baskerville system into something monstrous." He gestured toward the prisoners behind the bars. "Look at them, arrogant smug. They've trampled the clan's authority for far too long. This is what happens when education is neglected." The blond man and his companions, finally grasping the severity of their situation, dropped their bravado. Desperation etched their faces as they begged for mercy, offering Vikir anything he wanted in exchange for their lives. Chihuahua, ever the pragmatist, voiced his concern. "You do realize their families won't sit quietly, right? They may be cowards, but they're bold enough to retaliate if pushed too far. This could spiral out of control." Vikir's confident smile didn't waver as he reassured Chihuahua. "These men are deeply tied to the criminal underworld of Underdog City," he explained. "Their families are just as complicit. None of them would dare raise a complaint. They'd be incriminating themselves." Chihuahua wasn't convinced. "But what about evidence? Without proof, this could blow up in our faces." Vikir's reply was calm and cryptic. "I have ways of finding evidence. And if none exists," he let his words linger before finishing, "I'll create it." Despite his composed demeanor, Vikir's mind was racing with calculations. He wasn't concerned about backlash. The world was shifting, and soon he'd either be sent to battle or depart for the academy. Either way, time was on his side. Standing before the prisoners, Vikir's voice turned icy, each word deliberate and cutting. Human trafficking, kidnapping, bribery, blackmail, assault through intermediaries, murder. The crimes fell from his lips like hammer blows in the stifling silence of the cell. The blond man's desperation mounted. "Where's your proof?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Vikir smirked. "If I presented evidence, would you accept your punishment?" The blond man averted his gaze, the weight of his guilt unmistakable. His defiance crumbled into a silent plea, his expression screaming, "I'll never shame my family, even if I die here." The tense atmosphere broke with the sudden arrival of a bald man carrying a heavy bag. He greeted Vikir with casual ease, as though the grim scene before him was an everyday affair. "Your custom order is ready," he said, placing the bag at Vikir's feet. Vikir nodded in thanks and opened the bag, revealing an array of ominous tools. The bald man watched, a mix of dread and fascination on his face. Finally, he couldn't hold back. "I've been in this business for 30 years, but I've never seen tools like those. Where did you come up with such terrifying devices?" Without looking up, Vikir replied nonchalantly, "I didn't invent them. They were common where I came from." The bald man froze, visibly unsettled. "Where you came from? What hellhole is that?" Vikir chuckled. "Something like that." Then, almost casually, he added, "Want me to teach you how to use them?" The bald man quickly shook his head, his face pale. "No thanks. If I watch what you're about to do, I'd lose everything I've eaten this week." Vikir smirked, but didn't respond. He turned his focus back to the tools, methodically arranging them as his mind drifted to darker times, the era of destruction. Memories of breaking Demon Clan prisoners resurfaced, the era when interrogation techniques reached horrifying heights in sophistication and cruelty. Opening his coat, Vakir revealed a series of tools strapped to his body. The blond man's defiance shattered. His bravado dissolved into a high-pitched squeal as sheer terror gripped him. Vakir's expression was cold and unreadable. "What happened to your confidence?" he asked mockingly. "Where's all that tough talk about never confessing?" Buttoning the cuffs of his sleeves with deliberate calm, Vakir added, "Don't say anything just yet. Let's savor this moment. It's nostalgic." The blond man couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down his face, his body trembling uncontrollably as fear consumed him. Rumors of the arrests of the 7 wicked gangs spread like wildfire through Underdog City. In every corner of the city, taverns, markets, and alleys, the topic dominated conversations. At a dimly lit tavern, a group of patrons argued over the shocking news. "Good riddance," one man spat. "Those gangs treated ordinary folks like pests." Another, more skeptical voice chimed in, "Don't get your hopes up. The new deputy consul might make some noise, but he'll release them soon enough. They're too tied to the native families." "But the charges are serious this time," a third patron countered. "They might actually be executed." The room fell into uneasy murmurs as patrons debated whether the children of the native families could truly face such dire consequences. One man leaned in, his voice low but resolute. "Don't underestimate Vakir. This is the same man who burned 10 billion gold just to make a point. If anyone will follow through, it's him." Others scoffed, dismissing the arrests as a political ploy. "It's all for show," a patron said, waving a hand. "The native families will apologize, and the gang members will walk free. It's how things have always been." At first, it seemed those predictions might hold true. The Mablank, Pyre, Luib, Chanel, Daragamu, Hermes, and Prada clans, families tied to the 7 wicked gangs, issued formal apologies to Deputy Consul Vakir. But the apologies fell on deaf ears. In the heart of the city's central square, 7 severed heads hung grotesquely from iron spikes. Salt preserved their twisted expressions of agony, a chilling reminder of the suffering they endured before death. Above the heads, a public notice detailed their crimes and punishments under the Baskerville Family Autonomy Constitution, a set of laws infamous for its strict and unforgiving penalties. Clause 1. Banning illegal brothels. Punishment: tattooing the word sex across the criminal's face. Clause 2. Banning illegal gambling. Punishment: wrist amputation, repeated 72 times, 1 for each offense. Clause 3. Banning illegal private loans. Punishment: eye removal. This penalty was suspended after pleas from victims. Clause 4. Banning illegal lobbying. Punishment: exile. Since the criminals were already dead, their headless bodies were discarded outside the city walls. The crowd stood frozen, staring in silent horror at the grisly display. The severed heads of the 7 wicked gangs and the brutal enforcement of the laws left the city in shock. In his office, Vakir addressed Chihuahua, who was visibly shaken. "There's no need to look so surprised," Vakir said, his tone cold. "These laws have always existed. The only difference is that this is the first time the so-called native families are facing the consequences." Chihuahua swallowed hard, struggling to process what had just unfolded. "Do you really think this will work?" Vakir turned his gaze to the window, watching the flickering torches of the central square below. "This is only the beginning," he said. "This enforcement will spark a chain reaction. Underdog City is on the brink of a violent shift." His voice grew darker. "When the destruction begins, this city will become a bloodbath." Turning back to Chihuahua, Vakir's tone sharpened. "Brace yourself. You're joining me for the next step of the plan." Chihuahua blinked, clearly rattled. "Me? Why do I have to?" "You're part of this now," Vakir interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. Chihuahua let out a resigned sigh, his face pale as the weight of what lay ahead settled over him. The scene shifted to a dimly lit tent buzzing with anticipation. Chihuahua, now donning a sinister mask that only made him more jittery, stood among a crowd of similarly veiled figures. Turning slightly, he whispered nervously to a figure caged behind him. Vakir, exuding his usual unbothered confidence. "Are you sure this plan isn't insane?" Chihuahua asked, his voice barely audible. Vakir's crimson eyes locked onto him. "Have I ever let you down?" Chihuahua's silence spoke volumes. He adjusted his mask, feigning composure as more masked individuals filed into the area. This was no ordinary gathering. It was the infamous underground slave auction in Underdog City, a lawless pit nestled at the edge of Baskerville territory. Under the cover of night, a sprawling tent had risen from the barren wasteland, its garish lights luring in luxurious carriages like moths to a flame. Inside, a grim marketplace awaited, where lives were bartered like commodities. Kidnapped barbarians, disgraced nobles, and commoners alike. The Baskerville family, oblivious to this atrocity on their outskirts, remained conspicuously absent. At the entrance, The auctioneer greeted arrivals with exaggerated cheer. His tone shifted slightly upon noticing Chihuahua's group, recognizing the telltale insignias of the Mablin clan, one of the auction's most esteemed customers. "You're here as sellers this time," the auctioneer remarked, glancing at their credentials. "I trust you've brought something to impress. Last time, the clan wasn't exactly thrilled with our offerings." Chihuahua's lips curled into a nervous smirk beneath his mask. "No complaints here. Quality is never a problem." The auctioneer's gaze fell on Vakir, trapped in a cage among the other merchandise. His striking black hair and piercing crimson eyes drew the man's attention like a shark to blood. "Now that's a rare gem," he murmured, his greedy eyes glinting. "I'll make sure he fetches a premium." Feigning agreement, Chihuahua nodded and let the auctioneer handle the rest. The man bowed theatrically before disappearing, leaving Chihuahua to stew in the chaos of the tent. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The crowd of criminals and elites buzzed with anticipation, swapping whispers about the night's offerings. From exotic slaves to tragic nobles, everyone had their preferences, though all shared the same ravenous hunger for novelty. The auctioneer took the stage, his flamboyant energy rivaling that of a carnival barker. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "our first item, a beast straight from the nightmares of hell itself." With a dramatic flourish, he unveiled an A-rank monster, the Mercy Lego. The crowd gasped as the towering creature, part cow, part devil, growled menacingly. Its 19 hearts made it nearly impossible to kill, a fact the auctioneer didn't fail to exploit. "Every part of this beast is valuable," he announced, listing its leather, meat, bones, and even intestines. "The bidding starts at 100 million gold." Excitement rippled through the audience as the bids climbed. 140 million, 200 million, 250 million. "Sold for 250 million gold," the auctioneer bellowed, slamming his gavel with a theatrical bang. The crowd erupted into applause, eager for the next spectacle. As the auction continued, a variety of bizarre and horrifying products paraded across the stage, each commanding the audience's morbid fascination. However, the crowd's murmurs hushed when a worker approached the auctioneer, whispering in his ear. A wicked grin spread across his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice laced with excitement, "we have a special addition to tonight's lineup. From the savage tribes of the life-engulfing forests, a warrior of unparalleled ferocity." The girl was dragged onto the stage, her fierce glare defiant even as the chains bit into her wrists. The auctioneer wasted no time hyping her up as a wild beast begging to be tamed, urging the crowd to prove their dominance. "Bidding starts at 5 million gold," he declared, his voice booming. Silence. "All right, 3 million," he tried, his enthusiasm wavering. The crowd exchanged uninterested glances. "Fine, 1 million gold. She's a steal," he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. Still nothing. Murmurs of boredom rippled through the tent. Frustrated, the auctioneer waved the guards over. "Take her away. Let's get to something worth their time." The guard stepped in, but the girl wasn't about to go quietly. She thrashed violently, almost breaking free, until one guard struck her in the stomach. She crumpled to the floor, unconscious, and was unceremoniously dragged backstage. The auctioneer cleared his throat, forcing a smile as he tried to salvage the moment. "Apologies for that little incident, but fear not. I present to you the crown jewel of tonight's auction." The crowd stirred as the spotlight swung to Vakir, seated calmly in his cage. He radiated a quiet, commanding presence that silenced even the most restless attendees. "Behold," the auctioneer proclaimed, "a pure blood with striking black hair and crimson eyes, beauty, strength, and obedience in one perfect package." Before the bidding officially began, a woman in the crowd, smitten by Vakir's striking appearance, raised her hand. 600 million gold. The auctioneer blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "We haven't even announced the starting price." 800 million. Another bidder cut in, a gruff man with an imposing presence. The woman whirled on him, her tone sharp. "Why would you need him?" The man smirked. "I'll make him a gladiator. He'll be worth twice the price by the time I'm done." The two traded barbs as the bids climbed rapidly. 900 million, 1 billion. The tent buzzed with energy until a new contender, masked and silent, raised their plate. Number 99. 6 billion gold. The masked bidder said coolly, silencing the room in an instant. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That's Baron Gambino. He's swimming in money after taking over the underground funds from the granary." While the audience admired the Baron's bold move, his attendant leaned in, her tone cautious. "That's a dangerous sum for a slave. You'll only profit if he stays unscathed." The Baron shot her a withering glare. "I saved you from the streets, and this is how you repay me? Keep your mouth shut." The auctioneer slammed his gavel. "Sold. To customer 99 for 6 billion gold." Guards hauled Vakir from the cage, presenting him to Baron Gambino. Up close, Vikir's presence was even more intimidating, his crimson eyes practically daring the Baron to test him. "You're mine now," Gambino said, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "But don't worry, I'm not a bad guy." Vikir's stoic expression didn't falter, though the Baron's lecherous tone was enough to make the air in the room feel heavy. "Relax," Gambino purred. "I'll find all sorts of ways to enjoy you." If looks could kill, Vikir's glare would have struck him down on the spot. Vikir raised his bound hands toward the Baron, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. The Baron blinked, misinterpreting the gesture. "Oh, do you want me to unlock those for you?" Before the Baron could finish his sentence, Vikir's wrists tensed, and the cuffs snapped apart with a metallic crack that echoed through the room. "What?" The Baron sputtered, eyes wide. Vikir wasted no time. He delivered a thunderous kick to the Baron's chest, sending him sprawling across the floor like a discarded rag doll. Gambino's attendant, Cindy, froze in shock as the Baron writhed on the ground, gasping for air. Striding over, Vikir grabbed the Baron by the back of his collar, lifting him like a sack of grain. "Let's play a game," Vikir said, his voice calm, yet icy. "It's called Spear and Shield. I'm the spear. You're the shield. Let's see how long you last." With that, he slammed the Baron into the floor with bone-crunching force. Gambino screamed, flailing and calling out, "Cindy, do something." But before Cindy could react, the Baron had already gone limp. Vikir released him, standing over his unconscious form. "Game over," Vikir announced, his tone devoid of emotion. The shield failed. The room erupted into murmurs as Vikir reached up and removed his mask. Gasps rippled through the crowd as his identity was revealed. "Vikir van Baskerville," someone exclaimed in disbelief. Cindy stumbled back, her face pale. "A Baskerville here?" Vikir ignored her and crouched near the Baron's crumpled body, inspecting him with cold detachment. "Is he dead?" he asked flatly, as if the answer barely mattered. The crowd broke into whispers. "If he's here, then who's the new deputy consul of Underdog City? Why would a Baskerville hound come to this auction?" Amid the chaos, Chihuahua stood in the shadows, his heart pounding. He stared at Vikir, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. This isn't just an incident anymore, he thought, his mind racing. It's a catastrophe. Vikir straightened, surveying the tent with a chilling smile. "A circus," he muttered, his crimson eyes gleaming with menace. "That's what this place is. But don't expect the clowns to survive the show." Tension gripped the room. Vikir stood unarmed at the center, surrounded by a sea of guards. The crowd held its collective breath, unsure if they were about to witness a miracle or a massacre. The auctioneer, his face twisted with fury, shattered the silence. "Kill him," he roared, spittle flying. "I don't care if he's a Baskerville. Take him down." The guards charged, weapons glinting in the harsh light. Vikir's hand flickered. In an instant, Beelzebub, his blade, appeared, shimmering with a deadly red glow. Before the first guard could blink, Vikir moved, a blur of precision and brutality. The first wave of attackers fell in moments, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor as crimson streaks stained the ground. The crowd recoiled in horror. A guard wielding a massive chain, an iron ball swung it with all his might, the heavy weapon whistling through the air. Vikir sidestepped smoothly and, in one clean motion, severed both the chain and its wielder in a single stroke. The auctioneer's confidence crumbled. His lips trembled as realization dawned. This wasn't just any warrior. It was a graduate, one of the elite Baskerville hounds. "We don't stand a chance," the auctioneer thought, dread washing over him like a tide. From the shadows, Chihuahua muttered under his breath, his eyes wide as he watched Vikir carve through the guards like a force of nature. "I knew he was strong, but this is insane," he whispered, his awe laced with disbelief. Then, chaos shifted gears. A chilling laugh echoed through the room, halting the remaining murmurs. Vikir turned sharply to see the auctioneer holding Chihuahua hostage, a knife pressed tightly against his throat. "Drop your weapon and surrender," the auctioneer barked, his voice trembling with desperation, but full of venom. "Or I'll cut his throat right here and now." All eyes turned to Vikir, waiting for his next move. Vikir stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the auctioneer. His calm demeanor only served to agitate his opponent, who pressed the blade closer, drawing a thin line of blood on Chihuahua's neck. "Deputy Consul," Chihuahua spoke, his voice steady despite the danger. "Don't worry about me. Just do what you need to do." The auctioneer snarled, silencing Chihuahua with a rough shake. But his words had already struck their mark. Vikir's lips curled into an amused smile. "You got guts, Chihuahua," he said lightly. The tension thickened as Vikir reached down, producing a simple flute strapped to his leg. The auctioneer's confidence faltered for a moment, his brow furrowing. "What's that? Some kind of trick?" Ignoring the taunt, Vikir brought the flute to his lips. The high-pitched note that followed sliced through the air like a razor, its intensity rattling the very walls of the auction hall. The crowd clutched their ears, howling in agony as the sound reverberated, unrelenting and merciless. When the noise finally ceased, the room fell into an uneasy silence. The crowd exchanged confused, fearful glances. The auctioneer, sweating but outwardly unaffected, forced a grin. That's it? A cheap scare tactic. He chuckled nervously. Even a graduate can't. His words stopped abruptly. A thin blade pierced his throat from behind, slicing through flesh and bone with terrifying precision. Blood sprayed in an arc as his head rolled to the ground, his lifeless eyes still wide with shock. Behind him stood a hooded figure, their crimson-streaked blade gleaming under the dim lights. Chihuahua froze, unable to process what he had just witnessed. A guard, attempting to regain control, charged at the hooded figure. But the intruder barely moved, flicking their sword with casual ease. The guard's body shredded mid-stride, collapsing in a lifeless heap. As panic spread, more hooded figures emerged from the shadows, dozens of them. They moved with an eerie, synchronized grace, their auras radiating power and malice. Their eyes, cold and unfeeling, swept across the terrified room, freezing everyone in place. "Who are they?" a trembling guard whispered, his voice barely audible. Cindy Wendy, still clinging to the edges of composure, gasped as her eyes locked onto the distinctive insignia on their chests, a pair of razor-sharp teeth. Her face turned pale as she whispered, "The Pitbull Order, the Baskerville clan's elite, the Annihilation experts." A wave of dread swept through the crowd as the reality sunk in. Everyone in the room knew the legend of the Pitbull Order, an unstoppable force of graduates trained to kill without hesitation, their loyalty only to the Baskerville clan. Cindy froze as one of the Pitbull Knights materialized behind her, his blade poised to strike. Her heart thundered in her chest, panic seizing her thoughts. "I can't die here, not like this." But just as the knight's sword began to fall, Vikir's voice cut through the chaos. "Leave her alive." The knight halted instantly, lowering his weapon and kneeling in deference to Vikir. Cindy gasped, her chest heaving as relief washed over her. Vikir's gaze swept coldly across the room. "Rip the rest of them to shreds," he ordered, his tone sharp and unyielding. "But spare those lying still. If anyone flinches, kill them without hesitation." The knight nodded and vanished into the shadows like a specter. The hall erupted into a cacophony of screams as the Pitbull Knights carried out their master's commands with ruthless precision. Blades flashed, flesh tore, and pleas for mercy were silenced in an instant. Amid the slaughter, one trembling man lay prone, desperately willing himself to stay motionless. "Don't move. Don't breathe. Just stay down and maybe, just maybe I'll survive this." A knight loomed over him, an imposing figure radiating lethal intent. "I'll wear the cuffs. I'll do whatever you want," the man sobbed, clutching at the last strands of his life. The knight's voice was cold and devoid of empathy. "We don't carry cuffs." The man stammered, confusion breaking through his terror. "Then, what will you do to me?" The answer came without hesitation. The knight's blade flashed, severing the man's legs in a swift, brutal motion. The man's screams echoed through the hall as the knight moved on, uninterested in his suffering. "Those sentenced to execution don't need legs," he muttered flatly. Meanwhile, a figure puffing on a cigar stepped up beside Vikir. It was Boston Terrier Le Baskerville, the formidable commander of the Pitbull Knights. He took a long drag, his sharp gaze appraising the young warrior. "So, what do you think of the Pitbull Knights?" Boston Terrier asked, his tone casual but laced with pride. Vikir gave a curt nod. "They're effective." Boston Terrier smirked. "If you need anything else, just say the word." As he studied Vikir, his thoughts churned. No wonder Brother Hugo is so invested in this kid. At 15, he's already this sharp, fierce, and ruthless, a natural fit for us. Placing a hand on Vikir's head, Boston Terrier grinned. "Come join us. I'll raise you into a proper knight." Vikir hesitated briefly before responding, his tone polite but firm. "I'll think about it." Turning, he added, "I have urgent matters to attend to." Boston Terrier watched him leave, a faint frown tugging at his lips. "He's ignoring me," he thought, but instead of irritation, he felt a growing sense of intrigue. "That just makes me want him even more." Vikir slipped into the shadowy storeroom, his eyes narrowing as they adjusted to the dim light. "It's here somewhere," he muttered, prowling between crates and barrels with the precision of a predator. In the corner, a hulking safe caught his eye. For a fleeting second, he considered if it held the nobles' contributions. The thought of dragging it to City Hall for some bureaucratic taxation ritual briefly crossed his mind. "Yeah, no," he dismissed, smirking to himself. "I'm not here to play accountant." His attention shifted to a cage covered with a tattered cloth. As he stepped closer, a faint whimper reached his ears. His smirk vanished, replaced by a grim determination. Yanking the cloth away, he revealed a bruised and battered girl huddled inside. She flinched at the sudden exposure, her tear-streaked face a picture of fear and pain. Vikir let out a frustrated sigh, reaching into his pack. "You're lucky I have this," he muttered, pulling out a shimmering potion, a relic from the Pitbull Knights, known for its legendary healing properties. Carefully tilting the vial, he let a few drops trickle into her mouth. The transformation was almost instant. Wounds knitting together, bruises fading like ink washed away. Her eyelids fluttered open, but the sight of Vikir made her retreat further into the cage, trembling. Vikir frowned. "What's with the fear? Do I look like the bad guy here?" The girl remained silent, staring as if weighing her odds of survival. Vikir stood, unlocking the cage with a practiced twist. "Go," he commanded, his tone firm but not unkind. When she didn't move, he switched to halting barbarian. "Run. Away." Her eyes widened slightly, the recognition of her native tongue flickering in her expression. Yet she hesitated, mumbling something in barbarian that sounded soft, almost pleading. Vikir crossed his arms. "Look, I'm not fluent, but this isn't a language test. The exit's that way." He pointed emphatically. Finally, the girl rose, still limping but steadier with each step. At the doorway, she paused and turned back to him, her voice trembling as she spoke again in barbarian. Vikir couldn't make out the words, but the gratitude in her tone was unmistakable. Once she disappeared into the night, Vikir exhaled and pulled another cloth aside. Beneath it lay his real target, the carcass of Mercy Lego, an A-rank monster. Still fresh, he noted, crouching down to inspect the massive beast's remains. A red aura began to shimmer from his hand, and moments later, Beelzebub materialized, a faint grin stretching across its sinister form. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Vikir said casually, as though addressing an old friend. "An A-rank snack. Try not to take all day. The Pitbull Knights will be here soon, and they don't like to share." Beelzebub let out a guttural, pleased sound, its hunger palpable. The aura around it flared as it descended upon the corpse, feasting with voracious glee. Vikir stood watch, arms crossed, his mind already calculating his next move. As dawn broke, the name Deputy Consul Vikir became the city's most chilling buzzword. Stories of his brutal crackdown on the criminal underworld spread like wildfire. Nobles and other elites involved in the illegal slave trade were now prisoners in Underdog City's notorious jail, minus a few limbs. The infamous Burning Suspension Club, once the crown jewel of the city's vice, had been reduced to smoldering ruins. Its VIP patrons hadn't fared any better. Their heads now adorned stakes in the main square, a grim display of justice that sent shockwaves through the city. The 7 original clans, whose heirs had been among the casualties, were quick to react. Their indignant letters of protest flooded Vikir's office. But his response was as cold and final as the guillotine. The death penalty is the only justice for violating the imperial family's ultimate decree. Vikir's assault wasn't just physical, it was financial. Bank drafts, incriminating ledgers, and records seized from Burning Suspension were handed over to the Baskerville clan. These documents detailed everything from bribes to secret transactions, implicating powerful players. With evidence mounting and reports heading to the imperial family, even the proudest clans found their protests turning to silence. In a desperate move, the patriarchs of the 7 original clans personally arrived at Vikir's office to beg for mercy. Their pleas were met with the same icy resolve. "The black ledgers don't lie," Vikir said, unflinching. "Your family assets will be confiscated. For the crime of treason, 3 generations of your bloodlines are sentenced to eradication. That's final." The city itself felt the shockwave of Vikir's iron rule. Execution grounds flowed red as the corrupt elite were purged. Freed from criminal strangleholds, public offices and contractors began hiring again, slashing unemployment. The destruction of the underground auction house funneled newfound tax revenue into public welfare. Businesses flourished, and even the stock market felt the effects as optimism surged. Underdog City transformed almost overnight, its people celebrating a newfound hope. Meanwhile, Vikir's popularity skyrocketed, and the once embattled deputy consul became a beacon of progress. One morning, Chihuahua entered Vikir's administrative office, carrying a steaming mug. "Coffee delivery," he announced with a grin. Vikir looked up, raising an eyebrow. "You're the office manager, not my errand boy." Chihuahua waved off the remark. "Call it gratitude. You saved me at the auction, remember?" That clown's knife was way too close for comfort. A rare smirk tugged at Vikir's lips. "Coffee? That's a bit cheap for a life debt." Chihuahua laughed. "Hey, it's not just any coffee. 2 spoons of sugar, extra creamer, and barely any water. Top shelf stuff." Their banter filled the room with an unusual warmth before Chihuahua shifted gears. "How's the transcribing going? Still practicing your writing?" Wordlessly, Vikir handed him a sheet of paper. Chihuahua scanned it, his eyes widening. Wow, you've only just started learning, and this is incredible. Your handwriting is nearly perfect. Vikir shrugged, downplaying the compliment. Still a long way to go. Besides, you're the one running this office like clockwork. Chihuahua chuckled, but couldn't help feeling awed. Beneath Vikir's stern demeanor lay a man capable of reshaping the city's foundations. He didn't just enforce laws. He understood their purpose, their weight. Watching Vikir at work, Chihuahua silently hoped he'd stay in Underdog City. With Vikir at the helm, it felt like the city was finally on the verge of something extraordinary. Under the pale glow of the moonlight slipping through iron bars, Vikir stood in the shadows of a prison cell. Opposite him, Cindy Wendy, Baron Gambino's former attendant, sat bound and blindfolded, her defiant posture stark against the cold walls. Breaking the silence, Vikir spoke, his tone apologetic yet distant. I should have come sooner, but duty kept me. Cindy Wendy, isn't it? She ignored the question, her voice cutting through the air like ice. Why did you spare me? Vikir stepped forward, removing the blindfold with deliberate calm. Their eyes met, his crimson gaze steady. Because I need answers. Her lips twisted into a bitter sneer. So that's it? You only kept me alive to interrogate me. Ignoring the jab, Vikir began pacing slowly, his words precise. Baron Gambino's meteoric rise wasn't natural. A nobody doesn't climb the ladder that fast without help. That help was you. Your talent for generating wealth made him untouchable. If you'd chosen a different path, you could have been a respected merchant, maybe even a banker. He stopped in front of her, dragging a chair noisily across the floor. Sitting down, he locked eyes with her. Let's keep this simple. Answer my questions honestly, and you'll walk free. Refuse, and his voice trailed off ominously, leaving the alternative to her imagination. Cindy's eyes narrowed as she bit her lip, wrestling with her anger before spitting out a reply. Fine, I'll answer. Vikir leaned back, his first question direct and unsettling in its simplicity. How would you rate my performance as a law enforcer? Her laugh was sharp and mocking. A shining beacon of justice in Underdog City, she quipped, sarcasm oozing from every word. Unmoved, Vikir leaned forward. Mockery's a dangerous game, Cindy. Play along. Or the deal's off. With an exasperated sigh, she dropped the act. Fine, you're doing well. Happy. Vikir's demeanor shifted instantly, his grin sudden and wolfish. Rising, he closed the distance between them, gripping her chin. His voice dropped to a chilling tone. Why do you think I'm doing well? Cindy stiffened, sweat beading on her brow as his crimson eyes bored into her. Releasing her, Vikir returned to his chair, gesturing for her to speak. Grinding her teeth, Cindy finally relented. Because you enforce order with fear. People listen, but not because they respect you. They're terrified. You crush criminals and boost your authority, but you're planting seeds of hatred at the same time. That hatred will grow, and one day, it'll burn everything you've built. She paused, her gaze hardening. And the Baskerville clan? They won't tolerate your rise. They don't like threats to the throne, and you're becoming one. Vikir's face remained unreadable, absorbing her words like a stone soaking in rain. After a moment, he asked, What's your solution then? How would you navigate this? Cindy locked eyes with Vikir, her voice calm but firm. If you want to survive, return all your authority and accomplishments here to the Baskerville clan and its leader. Keeping the spotlight on yourself will only make you a target. She paused, then added, Find a place where your power won't draw attention. Somewhere like the life-engulfing forest or the Imperial Academy. Among your peers, you can blend in, hide your strength, and slip out of the Baskerville clan's crosshairs. Cindy's tone softened slightly. If you do this, the clan leader will eventually bear the consequences in your place. Vikir said nothing at first, his gaze distant. The silence grew heavy, and Cindy's breath hitched as an overwhelming wave of bloodlust radiated from him. The air turned suffocating, the weight of his unspoken menace pressing down like a predator, sizing up its prey. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but laced with steel. I understand your suggestion, he said. It's like asking a loyal hunting dog to turn its fangs on its own master. His crimson eyes locked onto hers, the mix of bloodlust and cold calculation behind them unyielding. Yet Cindy, despite the shiver crawling up her spine, held his gaze with an unsettling calm. It's the only way to escape the Baskerville clan's hatred, she said evenly. A faint smile tugged at Vikir's lips. Not bad, he remarked. Your thoughts align suspiciously well with my own. To Cindy's surprise, Vikir stepped forward and unlocked her handcuffs, the metal clattering to the floor. She stared at him in disbelief. You're really letting me go? Vikir nodded, his expression unwavering. I keep my promises. Cindy hesitated as she walked past him, glancing back. I hope you never come to regret this. Before she could leave, his voice stopped her cold. Do you know the Messamid Inaro clan? Cindy turned, her expression puzzled. Bakir's tone was measured, deliberate. Among the founding families of Underdog City, everyone knows the 7 original clans. But there was an 8th, a prosperous merchant family, the Messamidinaro clan. They were as wealthy and influential as any of the 7. His voice darkened as he continued. Their rise ended in a single night. During a grand birthday celebration, the clan's youngest son showed off his newly learned sword technique. It stunned the onlookers because it was the secret Baskerville sword art, knowledge that only bloodline members of the Baskerville family are allowed to possess. Cindy's body tensed as she listened. Bakir's words carried the weight of history and bloodshed. The Baskerville clan leader deemed it a betrayal of the highest order. Their response was swift and merciless. The hunting dogs were unleashed, and the Messamidinaro clan was erased from existence. Cindy's unease grew, but she managed a forced smile. And what does this have to do with me? Bakir's eyes sharpened, his tone cutting. There's more to the story. That technique wasn't leaked by accident. It was stolen by the young masters of the 7 clans and taught to the boy as a cruel joke. The Messamidinaro clan was nothing more than a scapegoat, a victim of their malice. Cindy's forced smile faded entirely as Bakir stepped closer, his voice heavy with grim resolve. There was one survivor, a 1-year-old girl pulled from the ruins of her family's massacre. Beautiful, even as an infant, but beauty brought her no mercy. She endured unimaginable torment at the hands of those who took her. Cindy's fists clenched as anger flashed across her face. I don't want to hear any more of this, she snapped, turning away and striding toward the exit. But Bakir's voice cut through the silence, stopping her in her tracks. The story doesn't end there, he said, his tone measured but unrelenting. A new deputy consul uncovered the truth and brought justice. The 7 young masters who orchestrated the fall of the Messamidinaro clan were captured, interrogated, and forced to confess. His expression darkened, the weight of his words pressing into the room. Before they died, they showed remorse. Their final words were, "We're sorry for committing such a heinous crime." Cindy froze, tears streaming down her face as she turned to face him. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Who are they apologizing to?" Bakir met her gaze with calm resolve. "They were apologizing to the sole survivor of the Messamidinaro clan," he said. "To the girl who took the name Cindy Wendy." Cindy staggered, her tears falling faster. "How am I supposed to believe that?" she demanded, her voice raw with pain. "You tortured them. How can I trust that their apologies were genuine?" Without hesitation, Bakir grabbed a nearby torch. "There's only one way for you to believe me," he said evenly. "See it for yourself." He led Cindy through the dim halls to a desolate prison cell. Stopping before the door, he gestured toward the ground. "Look." Cindy's eyes widened as she took in the horrific sight. On the cold stone floor, written in dried blood, were the prisoner's final, desperate words. "We brought devastation upon the Messamidinaro clan. Forgive us for our crimes." The pitiful plea was raw and haunting, a message scrawled in their final moments of terror. Cindy's knees buckled as the weight of it all hit her. Overcome, she clutched her stomach and retched, tears streaming down her cheeks as she trembled. Bakir stood behind her, his voice steady but laced with an edge of cold purpose. "Even though they suffered and died, the vengeance of the Messamidinaro clan isn't finished. There's still one more clan that must pay for what they've done." He knelt slightly to meet her gaze, his crimson eyes burning with intensity. "Hate the Baskervilles. You have every right to despise us. As a survivor of the Messamidinaro clan." Cindy wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her tears refusing to stop. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Why are you helping me? You're a Baskerville yourself." Bakir's lips curled into a faint smirk. "You're asking the wrong question." Cindy pushed herself to her feet, brushing off the dust as she steadied her shaking frame. Without another word, she began to walk away, but at the door, she paused and turned back to him. Her expression was calm now, her voice steady. "I understand," she said quietly. "Bakir Van Baskerville, I owe you a debt." Her tone grew firm, conviction lining every word. "No matter where life takes you, you'll never have to worry about money again. That's my promise." With that, she disappeared into the shadows of the hallway. Bakir stood in silence, watching her go until her footsteps faded into the distance. Then, almost to himself, he muttered with a faint smirk, "I'll hold you to that promise." The next morning, Chihuahua burst into Bakir's quarters, full of energy. "Deputy Consul, it's time to..." He started but froze mid-sentence. The scene before him was something out of a nightmare. Blood-soaked sheets and lifeless bodies scattered across the room. Bakir stirred, stretching lazily before rubbing his eyes. "Good morning," he greeted casually, as though nothing were amiss. Chihuahua's jaw nearly hit the floor. "Good morning. What about?" "All the corpses," he shouted, pointing wildly. Bakir glanced around at the carnage, his expression nonchalant. "Oh, those?" Looks like I killed them in my sleep, he replied with a shrug. Chihuahua stared, utterly horrified. Are you serious? Vikir chuckled lightly. Relax, I'm kidding. As they made their way down the hallway, Chihuahua shot him a wary look. Deputy Consul, I have to ask, what was your childhood like? Vikir smirked, amusement dancing in his crimson eyes. Didn't find my joke funny? That's not what I meant, Chihuahua muttered, exasperated. Vikir's tone turned thoughtful, almost distracted. Lately, I've had some inconveniences. Poison arrows, acid snipers, arson attacks, 2 near misses with runaway carts, the usual. Think I've caught someone's attention? Chihuahua stared at him in disbelief. You're insane. Ignoring the comment, Vikir's mind drifted to Beelzebub, the weapon fused to his arm. His latest skill, Hellish Buffalo's Tough Life, obtained from the illegal auction, had proven incredibly effective despite its risks. With Beelzebub's slots now filled by Burn Injury Cerberus, Hemorrhage Hellhound, and Tough Life Hellish Buffalo, Vikir's body was enhanced beyond recognition. Combined with the River Styx's modifications, his skin had become so resilient that even elite assassins had failed to harm him. But while the power was satisfying, the relentless attempts on his life were becoming more than just an irritation. I need to figure out who's behind these attacks and deal with them, Vikir muttered, his tone sharp. Chihuahua, still processing Vikir's casual recount of near-death experiences, nodded nervously. That sounds like a good idea. As they approached the courtyard, both noticed a carriage waiting nearby. The flag it bore was unmistakable, the Baskerville crest. They've sent someone from the main family, Vikir said, his tone growing serious. The carriage door opened, and a figure stepped out. Chihuahua immediately began sweating bullets, his posture stiff as he whispered to himself. No way. It's really him. Vikir, by contrast, remained calm, his crimson gaze steady. The figure descending from the carriage was none other than John Barrymore, the legendary head butler of the Baskerville household. John greeted Vikir with a warm smile. It's been quite a while, hasn't it? Vikir inclined his head politely. You look well, head butler, he replied. The butler chuckled as he approached. Do I? I've always believed you'd do well since leaving the main residence. Just luck, Vikir replied modestly, his expression betraying little. Nearby, Chihuahua was awestruck. John Barrymore wasn't just a servant. He was the servant, a man who had faithfully served the fearsome Baskerville family for 4 generations. Meeting him was like standing in the presence of a myth. Breaking the moment, Vikir addressed John directly. What brings you here, head butler? John's ever-present smile didn't falter as he delivered his message. The patriarch has been following your progress and is pleased. He's ordered you to return to the main residence. Vikir blinked, momentarily thrown. Hugo is pleased, he thought, struggling to picture such a concept. In his mind, he imagined his stern Uncle Hugo smiling, an image so absurd he almost laughed out loud. At the Baskerville estate, Hugo Le Baskerville, the clan patriarch, sat at his desk, his piercing gaze fixed on a newspaper article with a peculiar headline. The most beloved figure among underdog citizens, Vikir. The piece listed several awards Vikir had earned. Most trusted by merchants, most loved by farmers, most respected by children and scholars, most targeted by assassins. Hugo's sharp eyes scanned the page before looking up at Vikir, standing silently before him. The Baskervilles have always been known for their weapons, not their wits, Hugo remarked bluntly. But with your actions, perhaps we can change that reputation. He nodded, a faint trace of approval in his expression. You've done well, Vikir. Vikir bowed deeply, placing a hand over his chest. I only did what was expected of me. Yet inwardly, he couldn't help but wonder if Hugo's rare praise masked another layer of intent. Was that faint smirk truly pride, or something far colder? Hugo leaned back in his chair, his tone commanding. Reward and punishment must always suit the occasion. You've earned your reward. You will be attending the Colosio Academy this year. Vikir nodded, unsurprised. He had anticipated this move. The Colosio Academy was the Empire's premier institution for the elite, accepting only the children of aristocracy and royalty. Its strict dormitory rules and unparalleled security made it the perfect training ground for the future rulers of the empire, and an ideal way for Vikir to grow stronger while keeping a safe distance from Hugo's scrutiny. Hugo continued, mentioning his intent to send companions with Vikir, but admitted he hadn't decided who. Do you have any siblings you prefer to take with you? He asked. Vikir answered smoothly, Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough. We're closest. Internally, he thought of them less as companions and more as reliable punching bags. Hugo nodded, seemingly satisfied. Done. He then asked Vikir if he recalled a plan they had discussed when he was just 8 years old. Vikir's mind immediately went to their joint training with the Morgs. You're referring to the plan to lend the ruby mines to the Morgs and use them to wipe out the barbarians? A smirk spread across Hugo's face. Exactly. And it worked. Intrigued, Vikir pressed for details. Hugo explained that the Morgs, seeking Baskerville support for a joint raid, had approached them with humility. The alliance was already yielding promising results. Switching topics, Hugo added one final task before Vakir's departure. Inspect the territory. Ensure the laws you implemented are being upheld. It will be educational. Vakir bowed once more. I'll follow your orders, Patriarch. The next day, Vakir and Chihuahua stood at the city gates. Tears streamed down Chihuahua's face as he waved frantically. Deputy Consul, I'll do my best to manage everything while you're gone. Vakir turned slightly, glancing back at the emotional Chihuahua. Though he said nothing, he silently noted that this parting was likely permanent. As Vakir and his small group traveled farther from the city, the quiet was broken by his voice, sharp and commanding. Come out, now. In an instant, dozens of figures dressed in black emerged from the surrounding trees and rocks, encircling the group. One of them stepped closer to Vakir, removing his head covering to reveal his face. The man stepped forward, removing his hood to reveal a sharp face and an air of confidence. Staffordshire Baskerville, he introduced himself. Knight of the Pitbull Order. Vakir nodded in acknowledgement. Thank you for waiting. I wanted the departure to proceed in an orderly fashion. Staffordshire waved off the apology. No trouble at all. Our mission is to safely escort you to the Morg's family's juvenile fortress. Vakir's expression remained calm as he asked, Any word from my uncle, Boston Terrier? Staffordshire chuckled. He's doing well, but he's been relentless about trying to recruit you into the Pitbull Order ever since the slave auction incident. A faint smirk tugged at Vakir's lips. Internally, he couldn't help but feel uneasy about his uncle's obsession. It bordered on fanatical. The group eventually reached a hilly region where farmers worked the land with quiet diligence. Vakir gestured toward the fields. Is this the territory we lent to the Morgs? Staffordshire nodded. That's right. Everything seems peaceful here. No signs of trouble. Vakir's eyes swept across the farmland, his sharp gaze taking in every detail. Though the stated purpose of their mission was a routine inspection, Vakir knew the real goal, to eliminate the barbarians. As they moved on, Staffordshire provided more information. The Morgs family has assembled quite the force. 3 delegates, 30 members of the lower house parliament, and around 100 unaffiliated mages. Vakir noted the Morgs' efforts, contrasting it with the Baskervilles' modest contribution. Just himself, a dozen knights, and the elite forces stationed on standby beyond the mountains. Hugo's parting words echoed in his mind. Observe the barbarians' way of life. It'll serve you well. The fortress came into view, looming in the distance. Its surroundings were grim. Dead trees littered the landscape, their branches adorned with skeletons swaying in the breeze. Vakir observed the macabre scene. A mage's handiwork, he remarked. Clearly a message from the Morgs to the barbarians. Staffordshire shuddered. It's unsettling to say the least. But Vakir's thoughts drifted to Camus Morgs. How much had she changed since their last encounter? As they neared the gates, 3 figures appeared on top of the walls. A stern voice called out, State your business. Vakir and Staffordshire looked up, surprised. Standing above them were 3 identical girls, their expressions equally defiant. One stepped forward confidently. No one passes without our permission. The other 2 immediately echoed her words in perfect unison. Vakir sighed inwardly. The 3 flowers. The infamous Morgs triplets, high cis, middle cis, and low cis, were well known for their chaos and unpredictable behavior. People often joked that their combined insanity could rival the gods themselves. Steeling himself, Vakir stepped forward. I am Vakir of the Baskerville Envoy team, here to inspect the territory and strengthen relations. Open the gates. High cis crossed her arms, unimpressed. I need to report to the person in charge first, she said smugly. You'll get your response tomorrow. Irritation flickered across Vakir's face. You're denying me entry into my own land? High cis smirked, and the other 2 followed suit. Tenant protection law, she retorted, her tone dripping with mockery. Don't look down on us just because we're renters. That law, it's from your family after all. Vakir's temple throbbed with annoyance as the mocking tone of High cis grated against his nerves. A familiar red aura flickered faintly around his hand, a reflection of his growing irritation. He exhaled slowly, reining in his anger before it boiled over. Keeping his voice calm, but icy, Vakir replied, I've amended the law. It now allows me to evict tenants I dislike. His words were sharp enough to cut through the tension. Open the gates. Now. A wave of killing intent radiated from Vakir, slamming into the triplets like a physical force. The sudden surge of bloodlust made them hesitate, a flicker of fear flashing across their faces. High cis, recovering quickly, glared at Vakir and sneered. We've heard about the psycho kid running Underdog City, but we've dealt with enough lunatics to know how to handle you. With a swift motion, she cast a spell, aiming it near Vakir. The explosion shook the ground, sending his horse rearing in fright. From above, Lo Sis shouted, "Don't even think about stepping on a morgue's territory without permission." Her insults sharpened. "Stupid swordsman. You think you can handle us? I'd love to see the so-called rising star of the Baskervilles try." Beside Vakir, Staffordshire's expression darkened as he instinctively drew his sword. "This won't end with words," he muttered grimly. Vakir signaled his readiness, a cold resolve settling over him. But before they could act, voices erupted from their group. "These girls don't even know their place." One member spat angrily. Another chimed in, his voice dripping with disdain. "Their words are absurd." The familiarity of the voices caught Vakir's attention. He glanced toward the hooded figures in his group, his thoughts turning. "I've heard those voices before." The morgue's triplets exchanged amused glances, their confidence unshaken. High Sis scoffed. "Mere underlings." Middle Sis smirked. "You think you outrank us?" Low Sis sneered. "You don't even know your place." But the three hooded members of Vakir's group stepped forward, their movements deliberate. "Not us," they declared firmly. In unison, they removed their hoods, revealing their identities. Vakir's eyes narrowed. Of course, it was the Baskerville triplets, High Burrow, Middle Burrow, and Low Burrow. Standing tall and radiating confidence, the triplets pointed toward Vakir and declared in unison, "He is the symbol of Baskerville." Turning to Vakir with matching grins, they added, "Leave this to us." Vakir's expression twisted into one of exasperation. "Great," he muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. "My annoyance has just doubled." Despite his irritation, the scene unfolded with the over-the-top theatrics only the Baskerville triplets could provide. Vakir, though thoroughly vexed, knew their motives well enough. High Burrow glanced back at Vakir, his tone brimming with gratitude. "Thanks for recommending us to the Academy. Don't worry, we've got this handled." Vakir's thoughts raced as he pieced together their intent. "So, this is about the Academy?" Typical. To him, they were glorified sandbags, clumsy, brainless, but undeniably loyal. With the right training, they could at least be molded into effective soldiers. A faint smirk crossed Vakir's lips as he decided to humor them. "Fine, I'll leave this to you, older brothers." The Baskerville triplets practically glowed with pride at Vakir's begrudging acknowledgement. They stood straighter, their confidence soaring. Meanwhile, Mord's three flowers looked on with disdain. High Sis sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Pathetic, clinging to each other like scared little children. The Baskerville triplets, unfazed by the insult, responded in perfect unison by flipping them off. "No, you're the fools," they retorted, their defiance as synchronized as their gestures. High Sis's face twisted with anger, joined by Middle Sis and Low Sis, who bristled at the audacity. "They need to be taught a lesson," High Sis growled, her tone promising retribution. As the tension thickened, Vakir's thoughts wandered to memories of the morgue's triplets before his regression. He remembered them as formidable mages, each with a distinct affinity, water, earth, and nature. Individually strong, their combined magic was devastating, amplifying their spells to an extraordinary level. It was this seamless synergy that earned them the title Morgue's Three Flowers. Proving their reputation, the Morgue's triplets summoned their power, combining magic to create a colossal barrier of intertwining vines and earth. The massive wall loomed over their opponents, its dense structure exuding raw magical energy. High Sis perched atop the barrier, laughing triumphantly. "Let's see you get past this," she jeered, her sisters joining in to mock the Baskervilles. Undeterred, High Burrow drew his sword with a confident smirk. "This," he said coolly, nodding toward the vine wall. "It's nothing." Without hesitation, he executed the Baskerville first technique. His blade cut through the air with precision, slicing the vine barrier apart in one devastating strike. The once imposing wall crumbled into ruin, its shattered remains scattering across the field. From a distance, Staffordshire's eyes widened in admiration. "A flawless execution of the first technique," he murmured, impressed. But High Burrow's victory was short-lived. Before he could fully recover, a vine whip lashed out with blinding speed. He managed to block the strike with his sword, but the force sent him staggering backward. High Burrow, Middle Burrow, and Low Burrow shouted in alarm, rushing forward to assist as their brother struggled to regain his footing. Perched atop the wreckage of her barrier, Low Sis smirked down at the Baskervilles. "Your pathetic swords will never reach us," she taunted, her voice brimming with confidence. The Baskerville triplets' expressions darkened, their anger flaring like hunting hounds scenting blood. The air between the two groups grew heavy with unspoken tension, the promise of further violence thick in the atmosphere. Staffordshire turned to Vakir, observing his calm demeanor amidst the chaos. "Enjoying the show?" he asked, a trace of amusement in his tone. Vakir raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "What exactly do you mean by show?" Staffordshire gestured toward the clash. The age-old debate. Magic versus swordsmanship. Magic channels mana from the surroundings to amplify elemental power, while swordsmanship focuses a warrior's own energy for pure, explosive strength. Watching the two collide, it's fascinating, don't you think? Vakir sighed, his crimson eyes narrowing in exasperation. If you put it like that, I'm part of this debate too. Staffordshire smirked knowingly. True, but let's face it, you've already left everyone else in the dust. Vakir, however, was far from entertained. His expression hardened with frustration as he glanced at the ongoing clash. They're all wasting my time. If only they'd wipe each other out and save me the trouble. I've got more important things to deal with than refereeing a squabble between overgrown children. His thoughts drifted to his mounting responsibilities. Between managing the chaos of Underdog City and finding a capable supervisor, his patience for pointless bickering had long since worn thin. A fiery explosion erupted across the battlefield, silencing the chaos in an instant. A commanding voice, filled with anger, cut through the smoke and flames. What are you fools doing in front of my territory? High Burrow, momentarily distracted, tried to seize the advantage against High Sis, but the battle's tide shifted dramatically as a massive wall of fire surged forth. The blast shook the ground, leaving everyone momentarily stunned. Staffordshire tensed at the overwhelming display of magic, while Vakir stood unfazed, a faint smirk on his lips. If we're lucky, that might have incinerated them all, he muttered dryly. To his annoyance, the Baskerville triplets emerged from the smoke, coughing and stumbling, singed but alive. Vakir clicked his tongue in irritation, glaring at them. High Burrow wiped soot from his face, still in shock. What the hell was that? Middle Burrow, equally rattled, spun toward the source of the attack. Who's behind this smoke wall? He shouted. As the haze began to dissipate, the morgue's triplets came into view. High Sis and Middle Sis, usually so smug, were visibly shaken, their confidence cracked. If I dodged a second later, I'd be dead, High Sis muttered, trembling. Low Sis clung to her sisters, her voice shaking. What kind of monster uses fire magic like that? From atop the fortress gate, a figure stepped forward, flames still flickering in her hands. Her presence exuded authority, silencing the battlefield. Camus Morks. Her voice sliced through the tension. I can't forgive anyone who causes trouble in the territory I manage. She leapt down gracefully, landing in front of the morgue's triplets. Her cold gaze pierced through them, and High Sis scrambled to explain. We were trying to stop the invaders, she stammered. Low Sis pointed accusingly. It was their fault. They started it. Camus didn't flinch, fixing them with a withering glare. First of all, address me properly. I'm the vice head of this fortress, not someone you can call Camus so casually. Her sharp tone sent Middle Sis into a panic. Hastily, she corrected herself and addressed Camus with a proper honorific. Camus' gaze shifted to the skeletons swaying ominously in the trees. If you don't want to end up like them, she said icily, I suggest you think more carefully next time. Middle Sis squeaked in fear, bowing repeatedly as she apologized on behalf of her sisters. Camus turned her attention to Vakir, her eyes narrowing before recognition dawned. Her expression softened slightly as she approached him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It's been a long time, she said softly, her voice carrying a touch of warmth. 7 years, hasn't it? Vakir nodded, his expression relaxed. It has, he replied. As Camus studied him, Vakir's gaze briefly lingered on her. She looked more mature now, and he found himself noting her increased allure. He recalled how, in his previous life, Camus had captured the attention of countless men in high society. Rumors and scandals swirled around her, some involving even married men. But in this timeline, there were no whispers of such stories. Dismissing the thought, Vakir returned to the matter at hand. Open the gates, he said bluntly, his tone firm. Words won't work on the triplets. Camus blinked at Vakir's bluntness, her expression darkening. That's all you have to say to me after all this time, she snapped, her voice edged with frustration. Vakir tilted his head slightly, his crimson eyes studying her with a mix of curiosity and detachment. What else should I say? He replied, his tone calm and neutral. Camus' frustration boiled over. Staffordshire, observing from a safe distance, raised an eyebrow, wondering if this verbal sparring might escalate into a clash between the two stars of their respective clans. Pointing a trembling finger at Vakir, Camus glared at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. 0 points. You get 0 points, she declared, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Your attitude toward your future wife is appalling. The words hung in the air like a lightning strike. The entire group, Morg's 3 flowers, Baskerville's triplets, Staffordshire, and even Vakir, froze in stunned silence. Camus, realizing what she had just said, turned away sharply, her face reddening. She muttered a flustered humph while refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The collective thought running through everyone's mind was the same. Whose wife? Later, as the group rode toward the fortress, Vikir and Camus found themselves riding side by side. Their earlier tension softened into casual conversation. The Baskerville clan doesn't seem to know much about the barbarians, Camus remarked, her tone light but probing. Vikir raised an eyebrow. We know more than you think, he countered confidently. We've fought them countless times, probably more than the Morg's family ever has. Camus glanced at him sideways, her smirk returning. If that's true, why send those idiots? She asked, gesturing toward the Baskerville triplets in the distance, who were currently bickering over whose sword was shinier. Vikir shrugged. The arrangement was already made with the Morg's family, he replied. The main force is stationed on the other side of the mountain range. You know that. Camus leaned slightly closer, her voice teasing. You may think you know, but I wonder if you're as informed about the barbarians as you claim. Vikir met her gaze evenly. As the leader of this delegation, it's my duty to know everything. Of course I'm well informed. Camus' expression softened into a faint smile. For someone the clan may have wanted to discard, you seem surprisingly trusted now. The conversation shifted naturally. Which of the barbaric tribes do you find the most troublesome? Camus asked, her curiosity evident. Vikir considered for a moment before answering. The Balak warrior tribe and the Rococo sorcerer tribe, he said. The Balak are unmatched archers. Their skill surpasses even the Empire's best. And no, that's not common knowledge. Camus nodded, impressed. 8 points, she said, evaluating him in her own whimsical way. 8 points? Out of what? Vikir asked, frowning slightly. Camus grinned playfully. Out of 100, of course. You answered well, so you earned points. Vikir gave her a skeptical look, but let it go. Camus continued her peculiar scoring. I don't like overly intelligent men, she declared. They're boring. A little foolishness makes them more interesting. She shifted her gaze to his horse. Your choice of horse? Awful. That massive beast doesn't suit someone of your shorter stature. Her teasing tone carried a playful jab as she deducted 6 points. Then, she critiqued his attire. Your clothes? Bland and uninspired. For points for effort. Noticing that Vikir was entirely ignoring her commentary, she smirked. 1 point for your so-called manners. Finally, her eyes softened as she studied his face. Your face? 99 points, she said, her tone quieter and more sincere. But you lose 1 for that lack of expression control. Vikir let out a heavy sigh, his patience wearing thin. Enough with these pointless evaluations, he said, his tone firm. Camus' eyes narrowed, her tone sharp as she shot back. Pointless? I'm just being stern with my future husband. Vikir froze, confusion flashing across his face. Future husband? What are you even talking about? Camus folded her arms, huffing indignantly. You passed the test, remember? My uncle's test. That duel was to determine if you were worthy to be my husband. Vikir's eyes narrowed as realization set in. She was talking about the duel he had fought 7 years ago against her uncle, a test of his abilities as her potential partner. Camus, her frustration mounting, continued venting. I never agreed to this. That duel ruined my path to marriage. But she sighed heavily, her anger fading into reluctant resignation. A promise is a promise, so I have to follow through. Not that I'm happy about it. Vikir watched her silently, acknowledging her skill as a fire mage, among the best he had ever seen. Finally, he interrupted her rant with a blunt declaration. I've forgotten all about that day. As far as I'm concerned, it never happened. Camus' face turned bright red. Without hesitation, she grabbed her jacket and threw it at him. You idiot, she shouted. You can't just pretend something like that didn't happen. Besides, I'm a genius. I never forget anything I see. Vikir caught the jacket and stared at it, recognizing it instantly. It was the same one he had given her after their duel, 7 years ago, when her clothes had been burned. Camus, still blushing furiously, turned away with a huff. Don't read too much into it, she muttered, and stop saying such nonsense. Vikir examined the jacket more closely, smirking faintly. She returned it unwashed. As they reached the outskirts of the fortress, Camus pointed toward a distant wall. The barbarians ambushed the ruby mine, she explained. They've been pillaging crops and capturing indigenous slaves to sell elsewhere. She gestured toward the massive wall, a towering structure of earth and iron. We had our mages construct that in just 1 month. Vikir studied the wall, his eyes narrowing in appraisal. Impressive. It would have taken several hundred workers over a year to build something like that. Camus nodded, pride evident in her expression. Naturally, but Vikir's gaze lingered on the wall's flaws. Several large holes gaped in the structure, their edges jagged and burned. His expression darkened. Those were they caused by Balak arrows? Camus' expression turned grim. Yes, their arrows are imbued with a strong aura. We've suffered heavy casualties, especially during night guard duty. Those arrows can pierce walls 2 to 3 meters thick. She hesitated before adding, even my uncle wasn't spared. One of their arrows broke through his magic shield and struck his chest. He survived, but his pride didn't. Vakir's brow furrowed as he recalled a similar incident with Hugo, the Baskerville patriarch. A Balic arrow had grazed Hugo's nose bridge, leaving him seething with fury. Do you know who's behind these attacks? Vakir asked, his voice serious. Camus hesitated, her tone uncertain. It's hard to say. Their faces are painted black, so identifying them is nearly impossible. But I think it's a woman. Their conversation was cut short as a mage hurried toward them, addressing Camus with urgency. Vicehead, we've captured a reconnaissance member of the barbarians. Please come quickly. Vakir and Camus exchanged a glance. Curiosity and concern mirrored in their expressions. Following the mage to a large tent, they found a disheveled barbarian restrained and surrounded by guards. Vakir's sharp gaze swept over the captive. After a brief moment, he spoke with certainty. This one's from the Rococo sorcerer tribe. Camus turned to the mage, her expression firm. Have you been able to extract any information from him? The mage shook his head, frustration evident. He's uncooperative. His sorcery makes him resistant to psychic magic. We haven't been able to read his mind. Camus' eyes hardened as she directed her attention to the captive. Tell me about the ambush on the Mords clan's fortress. How many people did you take? The barbarian remained silent, his expression unreadable. Camus' voice sharpened with anger. Among those taken was Rose, a daughter of the Morgs. She's my sixth cousin. Tell me, what have you done with her? A twisted grin spread across the barbarian's face, and he muttered something in his native tongue. Camus frowned,